Chapter 51. Almost at the same time, in the North Pole in a scientific research station. Oh my god. Enter the spaceship and look at the ice-covered man holding a shield and wearing a familiar uniform. The bearded man at the head couldn't help but exclaimed. Half an hour later, Aegis headquarters, in the Trident building. Nick Fury, who heard the news, couldn't hide the shock in his heart at this moment. He couldn't imagine that the man was still alive, just sleeping in the ice. 70 years. God, this is an incredible thing. After muttering to himself, Nick Fury looked at Maria Hill, who pushed the door and barged in. He's still alive. Who is still alive? Looking at Nick Fury, whose expression is a little shocked and a little complicated at the moment, Maria Hill asked, I was just about to go to bed, but you called me again. I rushed over, but as soon as I entered the door, you told me he was still alive. The news of who is still alive can make you so shocked, and your expression is so complicated? KW. Don't tell me. He is Mr. Howard Stark in your mouth. Listening to Hill's complaints with a trace of complaining, Nick Fury regained his previous calm. That's right, if it was someone else who was just about to go to bed and was called by the boss to work overtime after taking it, it would be a little uncomfortable. Not Mr. Howard Stark, but the legendary hero. Looking at Hill in a bad mood, Nick Fury laughed. Who would have thought that the legendary hero who died 70 years ago to fight against S.H.I.E.L.D? After 70 years, he was discovered in the ice, and he hasn't died yet. Captain Steve Rogers? Hearing Nick Fury say this, Maria Hill immediately reacted. Ignoring a trace of depression in my heart, I immediately looked at Nick Fury and asked earnestly, You mean that captain is still alive? This is indeed a little too incredible. Yeah, it's incredible. When I just received the news, I couldn't believe it. Leaning back in his chair, Nick Fury was silent for a moment, then laughed. The news that Captain Steve Rogers is still alive is the best news for us. I have given an order to let Captain Rogers be transported back as quickly as possible. It's just that if I change the time period, I will be very happy, but unfortunately, we found out that there is a time node of Hydra hidden in the Aegis. Having said that, Nick Fury pinched his eyebrows helplessly. 70 years ago, in order to deal with S.H.I.E.L.D, he chose the most heroic way. But 70 years later, when awakening comes, facing a brand new and unfamiliar world, the only one who can be familiar with it is S.H.I.E.L.D. I can't imagine what kind of reaction I will have when I hear the news when the legendary hero recovers. This is our responsibility. It is also our responsibility. Listening to Nick Fury's words, Maria Hill was silent for a moment, then shook her head and said, Nick, don't you think your mind is a little too active because of this news? In fact, the resurrection of the legendary hero is the best result for Aegis, so that we will face the future battle with S.H.I.E.L.D, and we will have a higher chance of winning. But the only thing I'm worried about right now is if the Hydra guys are willing to bring Captain Steve Rogers back to life. Trust me, no one hates Captain Steve Rogers more than S.H.I.E.L.D. So we must face this matter very solemnly and guard against all the consequences that Captain Steve Rogers may encounter in the process of recovery. Looking at Hill's serious expression at the moment, Nick Fury suddenly laughed. I can definitely think of this. In fact, when I heard the news that Captain Rogers is still alive, I thought of this at the first time. If I didn't know about the existence of S.H.I.E.L.D, it would be fine. Now that I know, then I must use some special precautions. For example, seeing Nick Fury's sworn expression, Maria Hill asked, This matter definitely needs to be dealt with by the person I trust the most. Looking at the entire Aegis, who else is more suitable to take over this matter? And don't you think that the stinky boy wants to form a team of super ability users and is lacking someone who can lead them in the team? After all, I know that brat, and he doesn't want to be a superhero, so besides him, who else is more suitable than Captain Steve Rogers? After listening to Nick Fury's words, Maria Hill nodded slowly after thinking for a while. Now the New York Aegis branch is Su's Yantang. His ability is really good. In just 1.5 months, all suspicious people in the New York Aegis branch have been wiped out. So far, the people who can work in the Aegis branch are all his people. If you could leave Captain Steve Rogers' resuscitation to him, that would be the best fit. But there are a lot of things on his side. You put this thing on him again, so you're not afraid that he will be tired? Faced with Hill's words, Nick Fury suddenly laughed. This stinky boy is not afraid of being tired. He is more afraid of being idle. Definitely, and more importantly, he is the only person I can trust now. The New York Aegis branch is under his control, and it is the only Aegis branch I can trust at present. With a faint sigh, Nick Fury said in a low voice. Let's not talk about ability, character, and strength. Now, apart from him, I can't imagine who else I can trust completely and unconditionally. Hill, I know that you have always disapproved of my desire to form a team of super ability people. But Hill, once the Earth is really in danger, we will have no choice. Chapter 52. Selena, pass the order. From now on the special consultation room, and at the same time mobilize all the best doctors and clinicians in the Aegis branch to stand by. Notify Carl. Draw 20 members of the action team to stand by at any time. Notify Susan to withdraw all the members of the intelligence team except Anko and special events, and keep an eye on everything around the Aegis branch building. Notice. Listening to S.H.I.E.L.D's serious expression, constantly conveying orders. Selena constantly memorized S.H.I.E.L.D's various commands. After waiting for S.H.I.E.L.D to give all the orders, Selena immediately trotted out and began to convey S.H.I.E.L.D's orders. After watching Selena trot all the way out, Natasha Romanoff sat on the sofa, looked at S.H.I.E.L.D and asked with a smile, "What happened? You were so serious? Even in the middle of the night, I found my sister who was on vacation. Don't tell me you are going to go to war with a certain force. Think about it. The whole New York can make you pay a little attention. It seems that only Jeanbing's Hell's Kitchen. But even if you want to eliminate the Hell's Kitchen of Jeanbing, it seems that the number of members of the 20 action team is not enough." Looking at Natasha Romanoff, who was laughing and teasing while eating oranges because there were only herself and her left in the office, S.H.I.E.L.D also leaned back on the chair and smiled. "No way, Nick has given me another very important task this time, so I won't take it seriously." "What mission?" Hearing that it was Nick Fury's mission, Natasha Romanoff subconsciously frowned. In her opinion, the most important task that can be heard from S.H.I.E.L.D's mouth is the task that Nick Fury personally ordered and let S.H.I.E.L.D issue various orders overnight. It is very likely, then, that this task is extremely complex and dangerous. Someone is resurrected. Looking at Natasha Romanoff's serious expression, S.H.I.E.L.D smiled and said, "Take it easy, nah, an hour ago. A large fighter plane that fell and disappeared 70 years ago was found at the Arctic Scientific Research Station. And on that plane, where Steve Rogers had been frozen, now they found him, and they're going back. But the most amazing thing is that they detected Steve Rogers' vital signs, which means that even after being frozen for 70 years, Steve Rogers is still alive." Having said that, S.H.I.E.L.D looked at Natasha Romanoff and smiled. "You know, this matter should generally be taken over by Nick himself. After all, that Steve Rogers wasn't that important, but now, Nick is stuck with something, so he gave me the job. Nah, I'll get you back this time, and I hope you'll fly a Quinjet to bring Steve Rogers back. I don't worry about other people's words." Hearing S.H.I.E.L.D's words, Natasha Romanoff nodded solemnly. The name of Steve Rogers, Natasha Romanoff heard more than once in the Red House. After joining Aegis, she knew better what this person meant to Aegis. "I'll go now and let Carl follow me with someone." "It is good." Looking at Natasha Romanoff, who stood up neatly, S.H.I.E.L.D nodded lightly. "Trouble? Che, why are you being polite to my sister? If you really feel sorry for my elder sister, then after you get to level 9, you will raise my level by 1 level. God knows why cosmetics are so expensive now." After speaking, he waved his hand at S.H.I.E.L.D, and Natasha Romanoff turned around and left. After watching Natasha Romanoff turn and leave, S.H.I.E.L.D leaned back on the chair, wondering what was going on in his mind. After a while, he took out a pocket mobile phone, turned it on, and pressed the shield button on the dark layer of the table. When the call was connected, S.H.I.E.L.D told the story to Zhang Uncle on the other end of the phone. At the very beginning, Zhang Xian was also taken aback when he heard S.H.I.E.L.D say that Steve Rogers was found and still had vital signs. After all, no matter who heard the news that a guy who had been frozen for 70 years was still alive, he would be very surprised. But after being surprised, Zhang Xian didn't say much. Instead, he told S.H.I.E.L.D that this time Saber brought the Weather Witch and bought a large amount of Vibranium from the Vibranium dealer. It can be said that the harvest of the spear this time is great. After chatting for a while, S.H.I.E.L.D hung up the phone and put the phone back into the system space. Although the system has no intelligence at all, it is still very useful as a storage space. Seriously, Steve Rogers has been rediscovered and resurrected, which is really a good thing for S.H.I.E.L.D. And in the long run, it's a good thing for the world too. After all, the future of New York can be said to be full of disasters. As a part of Avengers, Steve Rogers is indeed indispensable. Now the only thing S.H.I.E.L.D thinks about is how to arrange Steve Rogers after the resuscitation. Looking at Nick Fury's meaning, It is already obvious that he will give Steve Rogers to himself completely, and he will not bother. Then how should I place this legendary hero who is undead and lives up to its reputation in the mouth of the future? Let it join the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch is inevitable, but this requires him to slowly get used to this world. Moreover, Carl used it very well himself, and he was not ready to hand over the action team to others, not even Steve Rogers. After all, no one is better than Carl, at least in my own mind. Who made Carl, the brothers who came out of the eagle's nest, not have any doubts, no matter what orders they issued. Even if it is the colleagues who let them attack the Aegis, even if one day in the future, I will lead them to attack and enter the headquarters of the Trident building. They will not have any doubts. They will only think that this is the right order. This point S.H.I.E.L.D. is still confident. Because of the 12 years, Carl and the others are already used to it. Habits are a terrible thing, and the facts have proved this. After all, when I first came to the New York Aegis branch, the first task to turn them over was to ambush the colleagues of the original New York Aegis branch who came down from the battlefield of the Hand Union. Sometimes loyalty is more trustworthy than ability. This is something Steve Rogers can't match with Carl and the others. But S.H.I.E.L.D.'s eyes lit up when he thought of Carl's action team. Well, there is a way. Chapter 53. Damn. Wake me up in the middle of the night. What's the matter? Yawning in his pajamas, he looked at S.H.I.E.L.D., who was standing in front of him respectfully. Alexander Pierce poured himself a glass of water and drank it all in one go. Only then did S.H.I.E.L.D. ask dissatisfiedly, "Sir, something has happened, and Steve Rogers is still alive." What? Alexander Pierce, who was originally dissatisfied, fell to the ground unconsciously after hearing S.H.I.E.L.D.'s words. Obviously, after hearing this news, Alexander Pierce was shocked. Seeing that the cup fell on the ground and shattered, S.H.I.E.L.D. hurried forward to clean it up, but was stopped by Alexander Pierce. Damn, tell me what happened. Why is Steve Rogers, who has been dead for 70 years, still alive? Looking at S.H.I.E.L.D., who wanted to clean up the glass fragments on the ground, Alexander Pierce asked with a grim face. No wonder Pierce suddenly lost his temper. After all, for S.H.I.E.L.D., the most hated person, besides Aegis, is Steve Rogers. After all, if it wasn't for Steve Rogers back then, there's a good chance the world would be Hydra now. So when he suddenly heard the news of the resurrection of that old rival of S.H.I.E.L.D., how could he not be shocked? Most importantly, as the Secretary General of S.H.I.E.L.D., he knows too much what Steve Rogers means to S.H.I.E.L.D. So even if Howard Stark is resurrected, Alexander Pierce doesn't want Steve Rogers resurrected. Here's the thing, sir. An hour ago, looking at Alexander Pierce with a ferocious face, S.H.I.E.L.D. quickly told what happened. Pierce, who had lost his temper because of the news, heard S.H.I.E.L.D.'s narration. This is a slow sigh of relief. That is to say, he didn't live in this world all the time. He didn't live incognito, but he was frozen for 70 years, right? After taking a long sigh of relief, Alexander Pierce snorted coldly. If you say something, you must say it clearly. This is that he is about to recover, not alive. These two concepts are different. If he reappeared incognito for 70 years, it would be extremely heavy bad news for us. But as Steve Rogers, who has been isolated from the world and recovered after being frozen for 70 years, has to re-understand and face this strange world again. For us S.H.I.E.L.D., although he is also a threat, he is not as good as the former. Listening to Alexander Pierce's reprimand, S.H.I.E.L.D. nodded quickly. But you're saying Nick Fury gave the order to send Steve Rogers to S.H.I.E.L.D. in New York and have him resuscitated there? Yes, Mr. Pierce. As soon as Nick Fury received the news, he ordered it to be sent to New York as quickly as possible. Faced with Alexander Pierce's question, S.H.I.E.L.D. answered quickly. Why did Nick Fury make such a sudden decision? Reaching out, trying to pick up the water glass on the table. But he was stunned to find that the water cup just now had fallen to the ground and shattered. Upon seeing this, S.H.I.E.L.D. hurriedly took a glass from the side and poured a new glass of water for Pierce. Taking over the new water glass, Alexander Pierce squinted and drank the water, gradually thinking. According to Nick Fury's character, the recovery of Steve Rogers, he will definitely put it in the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters and put it under his own eyes to feel at ease. After all, Steve Rogers is far more important than a super soldier. He is more like a spirit, and its influence is so great that for Aegis, there are only advantages and no disadvantages. And unfortunately, knowing this, Nick Fury uncharacteristically sent Steve Rogers to the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch and to that young man S.H.I.E.L.D. Leaning on the sofa, Alexander Pierce frowned at S.H.I.E.L.D. and asked, could it be that Nick Fury found something wrong with the Aegis? think that Aegis is not safe and cannot be fully trusted, so this decision was made? Listening to Alexander Pierce's question, Sitwell was silent for a moment, then said softly, "Sir, I was thinking about this before I came. Did Nick Fury find out about our S.H.I.E.L.D? That's why he chose to put such an important thing as Steve Rogers' recovery with that young man S.H.I.E.L.D. I thought so too at first, but then I thought, it shouldn't be. Nick Fury didn't find out that our Hydra was hidden in Aegis. After all, according to Nick Fury's style and methods, if he really found the shadow of our S.H.I.E.L.D, then it is impossible to be so calm now. So what? Looking at Sitwell with some hesitation, Alexander Pierce said directly, "If you have something to say, just say it." "Yes, sir." Hearing Pierce's words, Sitwell said what was in his heart. "Sir, you know that the reason why Nick Fury was able to become the master of the S.H.I.E.L.D. back then was entirely because of your full support. But now, just like when you recommended Nick Fury to support him, he is also fully supporting S.H.I.E.L.D. and will succeed him as the next controller of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the future. After all, S.H.I.E.L.D. was brought into S.H.I.E.L.D. by himself, and he watched him grow up and cultivated it with his own hands. So no matter what, he has tremendous trust in S.H.I.E.L.D. In addition, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s original ability is very strong. No one in the aegis of S.H.I.E.L.D. does not admire S.H.I.E.L.D.'s ability, character, and conduct. So, the subordinates believe that this time Nick Fury sent Steve Rogers to the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch. It's just to pave the way for that young man S.H.I.E.L.D. After all, once Steve Rogers recovers and gets acquainted with S.H.I.E.L.D., then in the future, when S.H.I.E.L.D. takes over from Nick Fury, with the support of Steve Rogers, even the people in the World Security Council have no way to refute it. Speaking of this, Sitwell said softly, because of what happened 70 years ago, Steve Rogers is in the civil society, in the S.H.I.E.L.D., or in the World Security Council. All of them have a very high reputation. If he speaks out in support of S.H.I.E.L.D., then no one will object. Hearing Sitwell's guess, Alexander Pierce thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. This reason is in the past. After all, everyone knows that Nick Fury trains S.H.I.E.L.D. as his only successor. So whether it is at the age of 22, taking over the most important branch of Aegis, the New York branch, or handing over such a big thing as Steve Rogers' recovery to S.H.I.E.L.D., it's all in the past. Oh, as long as we don't find traces of our S.H.I.E.L.D., there's no big problem. You are right, sir. Looking at Alexander Pierce, who had returned to his previous appearance, Sitwell quickly complimented. With you in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D., neither S.H.I.E.L.D. nor Nick Fury will pose any threat to us. But sir, once S.H.I.E.L.D. and Steve Rogers are tied, then the future. What are you afraid of? Looking at Sitwell with a worried expression, Alexander Pierce chuckled lightly, took the water glass and drank it. Then he sneered. When the Insight Plan is fully implemented, the world will surrender to the prestige of our S.H.I.E.L.D. By that time, neither S.H.I.E.L.D. nor Steve Rogers will be just random butchers on sticky boards. They can't become too big a climate. Seeing Alexander Pierce's domineering look, Sitwell quickly complimented. As someone who knew the ultimate purpose of the Insight program, Sitwell knew that if it was successful, it would be either S.H.I.E.L.D. or Steve Rogers. They will all become lambs to be slaughtered, as Mr. Pierce said. Chapter 54. Is this the legendary hero who is rumored to be famous? Looking at Steve Rogers, who has been thawed from the ice cubes and replaced with a short-sleeved, lying in the consultation room, who is still in a coma at the moment. Tony Stark crossed his arms, looked at S.H.I.E.L.D. next to him and said, "I think he's more like a guy who may be killed at any time. Wow, I'm still so young after 70 years, and my muscles haven't atrophied. I really want to dissect it." Hearing Tony Stark's vicious tongue, S.H.I.E.L.D. shook his head speechlessly. "You haven't seen him, right? Where do you feel so much resentment towards him?" "Resent? No. It's just the curiosity of a scientist, an inventor, right, Dr. Banner?" Hearing S.H.I.E.L.D.'s words, Tony Stark turned his head to look at Dr. Banner and laughed. Ordinary scientists don't seem to have this idea. Anyway, I don't have this idea." Hearing Tony mentioning himself, he had come over to watch it. Bruce Banner, the legendary hero captain, quickly shook his head. "Cut. It's really boring." Seeing Dr. Banner shaking his head to deny his words, Tony Stark shrugged. "Well, I do have a lot of resentment towards him. After all, no matter who it is, I have been taught by my father since childhood, and every time I teach it, I use this guy as an example. Then I think everyone will resent it. This is a normal thing." Looking at Captain America lying there, his breathing was steady at the moment. Tony Stark curled his lips and said, "Although I am in my heart, I have reconciled with my dad. But it doesn't mean that my resentment for this guy Steve Rogers is gone. Okay, be generous." Listening to Tony's words, Su-Che smiled and put his hand around his shoulder. "You are now a consultant for the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch, and when Steve Rogers wakes up, he will also join the S.H.I.E.L.D. And you are still from the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch, so you will be colleagues in the future, and among colleagues, be more generous. I regret being your advisor now." After rolling his eyes and saying a word, Tony Stark looked at Captain America with a serene expression at the moment. "Okay, for your sake, I won't care about this old popsicle. Definitely, if you invite today's lunch, I don't want to have a working meal in Aegis. I don't understand why there are so many vegetables in the working meal in Aegis building. Because eating more vegetables is good for the body, and it can supplement various vitamins that the human body needs, such as, oh Kong busy, spare me Dr. Banner." Listening to Dr. Banner's explanation on the side, Tony immediately put his hand around Dr. Banner's shoulder. "If you want to go out with us and let Sue treat you, then don't mention these things. Unless you want Aegis's work meal. Although I also like the Aegis building working meal, it's good to change the flavor occasionally." Listening to Tony's threat, Dr. Banner pursed his lips and decided to give in to the threat of Tony, the villain. "Although I know that celery is better, but God knows why, there is so much celery in every meal of Aegis Tower's working meals. Okay, let me invite you. So what do you two want for lunch?" "Barbecue. Chinese food." Hearing Su-Che's words, Tony Stark and Dr. Banner both spoke at the same time. If you eat barbecue at noon, just listen to Dr. Banner and eat Chinese food. It just so happens that there is a very formal Chinese restaurant nearby. Looking at the two of them, Su-Che made a decision directly. Why can't we eat barbecue at noon? No one stipulates that we can't eat at noon. Before Tony Stark could finish reading, Su-Che laughed and hugged Tony's shoulders and walked directly outside with Dr. Banner. After lunch, "That spicy tofu is really good. God, it's even more delicious with rice." Covering his stomach and lying on the sofa, Tony Stark looked at Su-Che with an expression of gluttony. "Dude, let's continue to eat that spicy tofu and that sweet and sour shredded pork tonight. Mapo tofu and fish-flavored shredded pork, but are you sure you won't accompany Peepo at night?" After taking a glass of water and drinking it down, Su-Che looked at Tony Stark, who was spread out on the sofa, looking like I didn't want to move. Then he laughed and joked. "I remember that a certain person said 2 days ago that he found that he liked Peibo a little and wanted to confess. If you like it, then it's best to express it immediately. What if it succeeds? Even if it is rejected, at least let the other party understand your intentions." Hearing Su-Che's words, Dr. Banner took himself a glass of water from the water dispenser and continued. "It's better than procrastinating and not confessing, and then seeing the girl you like accept someone else's confession. Trust me, Tony, you absolutely don't want to see that feeling when the girl you like is with someone else. Shit, I'll be rejected if I confess? Come on, I'm Tony Stark, okay?" Having said that, Tony Stark got up immediately and looked at Dr. Banner curiously. "But listening to you, it seems that there are some stories in it. Man, this is not what happened to you." Looking at Tony Stark, who was blinking with a curious expression, and Su-Che next to him, who was also looking at him curiously, Dr. Banner pursed his lips and then said with some regret, "I used to have a girlfriend. Well, she is still General Ross, the daughter of the person who wanted to arrest me. Unfortunately, guys, you should know that because of Gamma, as soon as I get stimulated, angry, or sense danger, I will transform into Hulk. Even because of Gamma, I can't even have a child that belongs to me, so for various reasons, I can't be with Betty anymore. So at first, I was hiding from her until Rose found out that I was going to transform into Hulk." With that said, Dr. Banner sighed softly. "Betty is a very good girl. I can't kill her for the rest of my life because of me. So even if Betty has a new boyfriend now, I'll just bless her." Hearing Dr. Banner's words, Tony Stark was silent for a moment, then got up and stood beside Dr. Banner with Su-Che. Before Dr. Banner could react, the two of them patted Dr. Banner on the shoulder with a look of comfort. Seeing the actions of these two guys, Dr. Banner suddenly said with a wry smile, "It was after I broke up with Betty that she found a boyfriend again. Not when she was with me, she just—" "No, don't look at me with such sympathetic eyes. I really haven't been. Hey, don't leave the two of you. Listen to me. It was only after I broke up with Betty that she found a boyfriend again. No, where are you two going?" While chasing Su-Che and Tony Stark to explain, Dr. Banner silently shouted at their backs. I still have a lot of things to do this afternoon, so I'll go to the office first. Without turning around, S.H.I.E.L.D just waved to Dr. Banner behind him and then walked to his office. I'm going to see Pepper. You're right, man. I should be bolder. He also gave Dr. Banner a wave of his back, and Tony Stark left with a smile. These two guys. Watching the two leave, Dr. Banner smiled and shook his head, then walked towards his research room. But, to be honest, after speaking out what was suffocating in my heart, I felt much better. Moreover, Dr. Banner actually knew that these two guys only used this method to resolve the anguish in their hearts. Otherwise, no matter whether it is S.H.I.E.L.D or Tony Stark, how can they mention the matter of confessing to people? Taking a deep breath, he walked down the corridor. Dr. Banner also had a subconscious smile on his face. Aegis is really a good place. Advertisement. Chapter 55. After asking Selena to make himself a cup of black tea, S.H.I.E.L.D sat in the office and continued to look at the documents that needed to be processed. In the past, I only knew that Nick Fury was very busy, but after taking over the New York S.H.I.E.L.D branch, I found that I was even busier. Looks like it's time to hand something out. You can't always have to decide everything by yourself. You only need to sign and agree at the last minute. Well, after all, Nick Fury has Hill's help, and he? Alas, if only Natasha Romanoff hadn't always thought about vacations. After I took over the Aegis in the future, where would I go to find the second Hill? Selena. It can be trusted, but it is only a personal assistant after all, and it is not comparable to Hill's ability at all. Just as S.H.I.E.L.D was thinking, a golden light instantly appeared in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s office. Soon, as the golden light began to spread, a golden magic teleportation channel appeared in front of S.H.I.E.L.D the next second. Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One, who walked out of the magical transmission channel, was not surprised at all because he suddenly appeared. S.H.I.E.L.D, who didn't even have the slightest emotion, nodded secretly in his heart. Hello, Mr. Su. Let me introduce myself. I am Ancient One. But the current Sorcerer Supreme in the magic holy place is also the Asgardian of the reality dimension of the Earth. Taking a step forward, Ancient One Magician took off the hat attached to the robe and said with a smile, like your S.H.I.E.L.D, our occult magician's responsibility is to protect the Earth. It's just that unlike S.H.I.E.L.D, what we magicians need to face are threats from different latitudes that come to the Earth. So don't worry, I don't have any malicious intent. Please sit down. Hearing the self-introduction of Ancient One Magician, S.H.I.E.L.D stretched out his hand and motioned Ancient One Magician to sit down. Thanks. After thanking S.H.I.E.L.D, Ancient One Magician asked with a gentle smile on his face. If I guessed correctly, Mr. Su, it should be the first time you have seen a group like our magicians. But you are very calm, which is a bit beyond my expectations. May I ask, where did you hear about us? Seeing Ancient One Magician's questioning with a gentle smile, S.H.I.E.L.D picked up the teapot on the table and poured Ancient One Magician a cup of black tea. Then he smiled. Sorry, I haven't heard of things like magicians on Earth, but you also know that there are many secrets in the Aegis. In the past 12 years, I have seen too many incredible things and experienced too many things that can drive ordinary people crazy. So today I saw the so-called magician, and tomorrow I see the legendary blood clan, the werewolf. Even if you told me that tomorrow is the end of the world, I wouldn't panic. Thanks. Taking the black tea from S.H.I.E.L.D, the Ancient One Magician thanked him. As the owner of the Time Gem, the Ancient One Magician is naturally able to see the future and the past. But it's not boring. Go watch S.H.I.E.L.D's past and future with Time Gem. After all, as Sorcerer Supreme, she has very heavy things to deal with. Definitely, in the foreseen future, I did see a lot of changes from the original future. But since everything is developing in a good direction, Ancient One naturally won't and doesn't want to interfere. Even, there are some things she is also happy to see. It is precisely because of this that the Ancient One Magician, who had just returned from the alien dimension, came directly to S.H.I.E.L.D. On the one hand, I want to see S.H.I.E.L.D with my own eyes, and on the other hand, it is for the black magic box. I have some very good tea leaves there. If you like it, I can send you some. After all, although you are drinking very good tea now, there is always something better in this world, isn't it? Listening to Ancient One Magician's words, S.H.I.E.L.D raised his brows slightly, then nodded with a smile. Thank you so much. But I think, as the Sorcerer Supreme of the Earth, you should not only want to send me some tea this time. If there is something, you might as well say it clearly, if it is related to the responsibilities of our Aegis, and it does not involve harming the world. harming ordinary people. Then I think I should not refuse. Thank you, but can I ask why? Hearing Su-Che's words, Ancient One Magician smiled and put down the cup in his hand. This is the first time we meet. So even so, are you willing to believe that I am not a bad person? What if everything is me deceiving you? For example, my identity, for example, my duty to protect the reality dimension of the earth. The purpose of everything is to get something from the Aegis to complete my evil plan? Su-Che almost couldn't hold back when he heard Ancient One Magician's words. If you hadn't seen the cinematic universe, who would have believed the Ancient One Magician would be so? Skin? Boss, let's finish things quickly, and then you go back to your magic holy place. Isn't it bad for me to continue to handle my Aegis work? Did you know that being with someone who owns a time gem can be stressful? In particular, his identity is not so formal. No, I will tell you plainly, I believe you. Why do you have to ask a question? You must know that when I saw you suddenly appear, I didn't take up my weapon to attack you, because I knew who you were. Although he was madly complaining in his heart, Su-Che's expression was still indifferent. First of all, where is your ability? My ability is very strong, but at the same time, my perception ability is also very strong, which is what I am most proud of. So I can perceive that your strength, Ancient One Magician, is at least the top level among the earth. If Ancient One Magician you ever threatened Earth, then either Aegis no longer exists, or you are locked in a special Aegis prison. But now, you are sitting here drinking tea with me. Doesn't that prove a lot of things? It seems to be full of loopholes, but in fact, for a strong man like Ancient One Magician, it is the most beneficial word to convince everything. After all, who really has great strength, who is willing to talk about those reasons such as 1.2 point and so on. It seems that I think too much. With a gentle smile at Su-Che, Ancient One Magician said softly, according to my age, I will call you Su, just like everyone else. Su, I was not on Earth some time ago, and I lost the other dimension. You can also think of it as another corner of the universe. I went there. After all, there are many other overlords of the level universe who are still eyeing the Earth. So although I warned them a little bit, there were still some people who didn't give up during my absence on Earth. It's like the black box you took with someone. In fact, it's just an introduction made by a guy named Beholder, using the greed of human beings. Having said that, Ancient One Magician picked up the teacup again and took a sip, and said with the same expression, the Beholder has always wanted to come to the Earth through me. Although his idea has never been successful, he has never given up, and he has been thinking of other ways. Like that black magic box? Hearing the words of the Ancient One Magician, I recalled that the guy holding the box, like a magician, kept saying things like, you are also here to snatch the treasure that belongs to me. Then nodded. So, Ancient One Magician, you mean, want me to give you that box? Not to me, but completely destroyed. Facing Su-Che's question, Ancient One Magician replied with a smile. If that magic box exists for one day, then the Earth is in danger for one day. Definitely, this is the first time we meet. So even if you trust me, I know that you will not give me such a dangerous thing. So I hope, Su, you can take action, completely destroy the magic box, and cut off the passage that he wants to come to the Earth through the ceremony. Advertisement. Chapter 56. On the 6th floor of the Aegis building, there is a special item storage room. After scanning through fingerprints and pupils, the expensive and extremely sturdy doors slowly opened. After taking the Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One through the 3 reinforced gates, you will see the most rare and dangerous things in the New York Aegis. Open the storage compartment numbered 353. In the next moment, a magic box emitting a dark light appeared in front of the two of them. Reaching out his hand, he took out the magic box. Looking at the magic box that was a little weak at the moment, Su-Che smiled and said, in less than a week, the light emitted by the magic box has weakened so much. If it takes a little longer, maybe it will become an ordinary box. Watching Su-Che pick up the magic box with both hands, but he was not attracted by the charm of the magic box. Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One smiled and nodded. It is parasitized by a trace of magic of the Beholder. Ordinary people will get it, or they will see the most feared thing in their lives. Or, you will see its most cherished and greedy things. Only those with extremely strong mental strength and firm minds can get rid of their bewitching in time. It's really rare for someone like you who has never learned magic, but who is extremely determined in both spiritual power and mind. Well, besides, your strength is quite good. Having said that, looking at the magic box exuding a dim light, Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One said softly. As for the light of the magic box becoming dim, it is entirely because there is no supply of essence and blood. That's why, for those who get this magic box, the final result will be very bleak. Having said that, Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One raised his head and looked at S.H.I.E.L.D. Destroy it, Sue. It exists one day, then the future may bring a trace of danger. Okay, Ancient One Magician. Hearing the words of Ancient One Magician, S.H.I.E.L.D. held up the magic box with one hand, and the next moment, the flame instantly burned in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s palm. In an instant, the entire magic box was shrouded in raging fire. Under its constant burning, the magic box seemed to have life, making a very harsh and sharp sound. Humph! Hearing this harsh, high-pitched sound, the Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One immediately snorted softly. With the coercive hum of the Ancient One Magician, the magic box that originally exuded a sharp sound disappeared in an instant. Almost in the blink of an eye, the magic box that originally exuded a dim light and seemed to be very solid gradually turned into ashes in the fire in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s palm. Then I saw Ancient One Magician wave his hand gently, and the ashes disappeared directly into the storage room. This can be considered a solution, but it's a pity that if I was on Earth at the time, no one would have died tragically in the hands of the magic box. After seeing the ashes of the magic box disappear, Ancient One Magician sighed, and suddenly raised his head to look at S.H.I.E.L.D. Your mental strength is very strong. It seems like you are born with it. This is far from something that can be formed through training the day after tomorrow. If one day, you are tired of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s work, or in the future, become the S.H.I.E.L.D. controller and cultivate your own successor. Welcome to Magic Holy Place to learn magic, I think. Your magic ability may be stronger than one of my future apprentices. Although at that time, I was probably no longer in this world, but whether it was the apprentice who succeeded me as Sorcerer Supreme in the future, or someone else, I think everyone will give you a very warm welcome. Listening to the words of Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One, S.H.I.E.L.D., who had been calm all along, showed a rare expression of curiosity. Ancient One Magician, you mean, my magic ability is very high? Yes, child. Raising his hand and patted S.H.I.E.L.D.'s shoulder lightly, Ancient One Magician smiled and said, I'm not lying, your magic ability is indeed very high, even higher than my current apprentices. Even in the future, the person who succeeded me may be a little far from you in the way of magic ability. It's a pity. I can't teach you personally otherwise. Sorcerer Supreme didn't go on. Just a look of regret flashed in his eyes. After all, the Sorcerer Supreme knew that S.H.I.E.L.D. wasn't giving up his role at Aegis at this point. Besides, S.H.I.E.L.D. in Aegis is far better for the future of the Earth than he becomes a magician. Nodding to S.H.I.E.L.D., Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One opened the magic teleportation channel with a smile and left. Seeing that the magic teleportation array, shimmering with golden light, was closed, S.H.I.E.L.D. breathed a sigh of relief. Seriously, under this status, facing the Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One is indeed a pressure. After all, they control Time Gem and claim to be the one who can see the past and the future. It's just that his magical ability is actually stronger than that of the future apprentice, the successor, Dr. Strange, in the mouth of Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One. Hiss. That's kind of interesting. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, the next moment suddenly came a bell from the Aegis building. Listening carefully to a bell, I found that it was a secondary bell. Only when something extremely urgent and extremely harmful occurs will the second-level bell appear in the Aegis building. Well, this only applies to the Aegis branch. Unless something devastating happens, the Trident Tower will sound the bell. Chapter 57. The secondary bells in the branches of the Aegis often represent the imminent occurrence of major emergencies. Although there is no first-class bell that represents the grave nature of world destruction. But when the secondary bell is turned on, it means that it is likely to be a city-level destruction event. Almost instantly, S.H.I.E.L.D. returned to the office, and soon, the entire Aegis branch quickly prepared for battle. As long as it is in the S.H.I.E.L.D. branch, whether it is the action team or the intelligence team, they all start to arm themselves quickly. And the person in charge of them also came to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s office at the fastest speed and waited for the order. Seeing that everyone was here, S.H.I.E.L.D. ordered Selena to tell everyone about it. Hearing S.H.I.E.L.D.'s order, Selena immediately put the documents and videos sent back from the monitoring team on the big screen. In the video, a monster with a body of 2 or 3 meters and full of explosive power is raging in New York City. Wherever he passed, there were constant screams of panic and despair from the crowd. The vehicle parked on the side of the road was lifted by the monster and slammed into the group of Ross who were chasing him. Where the tail sweeps, it can even easily destroy the building. Looking at the monsters in the video, everyone present frowned, even Tony Stark in battle armor. He couldn't help frowning and said, "Since when did New York have such monsters? And don't you think this monster is similar to Dr. Banner that Ross hunted down a month and a half ago?" "Definitely, except that it doesn't have a tail." Having said that, Tony Stark turned his head and looked at the silent Dr. Banner and said, "Don't worry, you know that's not what I meant." "I understand." Listening to Tony's words, Dr. Banner pursed his lips and nodded, then watched everyone turn their attention to himself. After being silent for a moment, Dr. Banner said, "When General Ross hunted me down, he wanted to use me for experiments and to create a super soldier serum. Or should I say, I want to create a group of monsters to enhance my strength. I think the appearance of this monster and Ross's ability to quickly lead people to capture battles, then it is very likely that this monster was tested according to Hulk, my prototype. Definitely, the result of the experiment should be a failure." Facing Dr. Banner's words, Su-Che nodded and said, "Dr. Banner is right. From the report sent by the monitoring team just now, the place where this monster first appeared is the laboratory of Ross's group. That is to say, where did this monster escape from? And that's why Ross and the others were able to hunt them down in the first place." Hearing Su-Che say this, Natasha Romanoff sat on the sofa and said, "So, do we need our Aegis to play? Sue, I know that Ross has complained to Nick Fury more than once and pressured him to replace you, or even arrest you. The reason is because you accepted Dr. Banner in the name of Aegis." Looking at Dr. Banner, who had an embarrassed expression upon hearing this, Natasha Romanoff smiled and said, "Hey, Bruce, don't be embarrassed. Don't worry. If his complaint was useful, then you would have been taken out of Aegis. Don't worry, Aegis and they are not the same department. They don't have the power to issue orders to Aegis." Listening to Natasha Romanoff's consolation, Dr. Banner touched his nose and nodded. "Thank you. Boss, make your decision." Carl, who was always holding his weapon, said directly after hearing Natasha Romanoff's words, "Although this matter has nothing to do with our Aegis, we can be sure that it's all caused by that guy Ross. But we all obey your orders. You say go. We brothers in the action group will play with this monster. If you don't care, then this matter has nothing to do with us anyway." "How could it not matter?" Hearing Carl's words, before Su-Che could speak, Susan, the boss of the intelligence team, said speechlessly, "We are the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch here. It's responsible for keeping New York safe, even though this monster is an experimental product of that nasty guy Ross. But in the end, it threatens ordinary citizens, so how could our Aegis not appear? Believe it or not, if our S.H.I.E.L.D. people don't show up, we will soon receive accountability from headquarters." Having said this, Susan shrugged her shoulders. "Although, the so-called accountability, we don't need to care at all, after all. Where is Mr. Nick Fury bearing it?" Susan's voice fell, and everyone's eyes turned to Su-Che, waiting for Su-Che's order. Seeing everyone looking at him, Su-Che said softly, "I don't want to go with the Aegis brothers, but this time, we have to go. It's not just because of the accountability of Aegis, and it's not just because of Ross, who can't conquer this monster at all. The more important reason is that this monster appeared on the streets of New York, and he has seriously endangered the safety of ordinary people. This is something we absolutely don't want to see in Aegis. Our Aegis duty is to supervise and eliminate all people or monsters that threaten the safety of ordinary people within the supernatural range. So, this is our duty." Hearing Su-Che's words, everyone nodded. Natasha Romanoff got up immediately, looked at Su-Che and said, "Okay, I'll start the Kuan-style fighter now. I really envy that guy Barton. He doesn't have a task now, so he's going back to accompany him again. Wife and eldest daughter. Nah." Watching Natasha Romanoff get up, Su-Che shook his head directly and said, "Nah, you don't have to go this time. Even most of the brothers in the action team don't have to be dispatched. I'll take Tony, Dr. Banner, and Carl and their first action team there. Nah, after I leave the Aegis building, you immediately take all the brothers and sisters of the action team and intelligence team to take charge of the security of the entire Aegis building, especially in the special consultation room. For now, the most important thing is to ensure that Steve Rogers can recover safely." Hearing Su-Che's words, Natasha Romanoff glanced at Su-Che in surprise. As a partner for so many years, the moment I saw Su-Che's eyes, I understood the meaning of Su-Che's unspoken words. Clear. With a slight nod, Natasha Romanoff turned around and took the person, walking towards the direction of the special consultation room in person. Although I don't know what S.H.I.E.L.D is worried about, who dares to attack the Aegis building. But as one of the few people who is most familiar with S.H.I.E.L.D, Natasha Romanoff knows that S.H.I.E.L.D's worries are never unfounded. Chapter 58. The Streets of New York. Bang! Da-da-da. Countless bullets continued to attack Abomination like raindrops, but the rain of bullets that used to be terrifying, now attacking Abomination, did not cause any damage at all. On the contrary, the hatred and anger grew even more. I saw Abomination holding a car that had already been smashed and slammed it towards the tank closest to him. Boom! A huge amount of rumbling sounded, and the tank was instantly smashed into a pile of scrap metal by this car, which was poured out of hatred and fury. Seeing this scene, Ross at the back was extremely angry at the moment, but he was helpless. Sir, if it goes on like this, the hatred will probably ruin the whole street. Seeing that one's own attacks have no effect at all, instead, he hates constantly repelling his own attacks again and again. A soldier beside Ross immediately reported, "Nonsense, can't I see it?" Listening to the soldier's report, Ross clenched his fist and smashed the car in front of him hard. Damn it, this is also in the city, otherwise I will definitely find a way to lead it out of the city. I can't let this hateful guy continue. Before Ross could finish speaking, there was a sudden roar in the sky. Looking up subconsciously, Ross's already black face was even more ugly at the moment. I knew, damn it, I knew that this kind of thing couldn't be done without the S.H.I.E.L.D guys. Thinking of S.H.I.E.L.D's handsome face, Ross's inner anger was even stronger at the moment. Especially watching the slowly descending Quinjet, S.H.I.E.L.D brought Tony Stark in battle armor, as well as Dr. Bruce Banner and several members of the S.H.I.E.L.D team. Ross can even imagine how that damn young man named S.H.I.E.L.D should ridicule himself for a while. Damn, there isn't a good guy in Aegis. Sure enough, just as Ross thought, S.H.I.E.L.D walked over with a group of people, and then said, "Yo, isn't this General Ross? Good guy." As expected of General Ross stationed in New York, he actually made such a big scene. TSK, that's really stylish. Listening to S.H.I.E.L.D's sarcasm, Ross asked with a dark face, "What are you people of Aegis coming to do? It's enough to have us here. Is it enough to have you?" Listening to Rose's words, S.H.I.E.L.D crossed his arms, looked at the direction of the hatred that was smashing, and then shook his head. "I didn't see any signs that you guys have brought the scene under control. I only saw countless civilians screaming in horror and despair. I only saw that where this monster ran rampant, the originally beautiful and sturdy buildings were now full of broken walls." Listening to S.H.I.E.L.D's words, Ross clenched his fists tightly, wishing to punch S.H.I.E.L.D's handsome face. But he still could only hold back the anger in his heart and roared at S.H.I.E.L.D, "Damn, did you bring someone here just to ridicule me? Trick you? I don't have time." Listening to Ross's words, S.H.I.E.L.D turned his head and glanced at the monster. "Since I took over the New York Aegis branch, it has been very peaceful here. Even because of me, there's a superhero Iron Man in this city who is happy to help them and is loved by everyone. In the end, under a good scene, you made a mess, and you even created such a monster in an experiment for no reason. You said you. Damn, what are you trying to say?" Hammering his car hard, Ross looked at S.H.I.E.L.D and roared, "What do I want to say? It's very simple. I mean, you caused it all, so the responsibility is on you. And I brought someone over to clean up the mess. So the credit for protecting the civilians and the city is mine. Well, it's that simple. TSK, this is another feat on my resume that cannot be ignored. It also lays a very good foundation for me to take over Aegis in the future. Speaking of which, I have to thank you." Looking at Ross, S.H.I.E.L.D thanked him very sincerely. "You." Hearing S.H.I.E.L.D's shameless words, Ross almost fainted. When is this special girl? And she still has the mind to divide responsibility and credit. Damn, are all the people of Aegis so shameless? Well, it's really shameless. But hearing that everyone loves him and that he is a superhero, Tony Stark thinks what S.H.I.E.L.D said makes sense. That's right, I'm everyone's favorite superhero. Dr. Banner, all this is up to you." Seeing that angry Abomination seemed to want to rush to the next block, S.H.I.E.L.D turned his head to look at Dr. Banner and whispered, "No problem. To be honest, I like the atmosphere at Aegis too. At least nowhere. I don't have to worry about being taken away as a test object at any time. And in the Aegis building, no one regards me as a monster. So since this is the credit of our Aegis building, then I naturally won't stand idly by." Saying that, Dr. Banner took a few steps forward, and then his whole body started to grow bigger in an instant. With a roar, The next moment Hulk was born. Listening to what Dr. Banner just said, Ross almost rolled his eyes in frustration. What is it that this is a credit to S.H.I.E.L.D., so you can't just sit idly by? Isn't it all because of you? How come it took less than 2 months to go to S.H.I.E.L.D., and you have learned badly? Especially after seeing that even after transforming into Hulk, he did not forget to smirk at S.H.I.E.L.D. before rushing towards the hated Hulk. Ross was even more speechless. Special mothers, doesn't it mean that once you transform into Hulk, you will not recognize 6 relatives? What's the matter with your stupid smirk at that damn S.H.I.E.L.D.? General Ross, what are you waiting for? Let your people stop the fire. Otherwise, if you accidentally attack Hulk and cause even more trouble, you won't be able to solve it by losing this suit. Looking at Hulk, who was rushing towards the hate, S.H.I.E.L.D. turned his head to look at General Ross and said, "Humph, I don't need you to teach me." After hearing S.H.I.E.L.D.'s words, Ross snorted coldly, but he still ordered everyone to stop attacking. He knew that S.H.I.E.L.D. was right. He created such a big scene. If it continued to deteriorate, I am afraid that I will really face more serious consequences. Chapter 59. Maybe it's because I hate Hulk and think that it's all because of Hulk that I'm like this. After seeing Hulk rushing towards him, his hateful eyes immediately turned red. Almost in an instant, Abomination immediately gave up attacking Ross's men, clenched his fists and charged directly towards Hulk. Bang! Before Hulk could react, a heavy punch hit Hulk directly in the face. The sound of the fist hitting the face, even Tony Stark, who was not far away, couldn't help gasping for air. I think not only the anti-Hulk armor should be researched soon, but its materials should be updated soon. Man, is there a better and stronger material for our Aegis? Looking at the battle between these two guys, I always feel that the material used by my armor is not so safe. Safe? Watching Hulk and Hatred fighting each other, Tony Stark grinned at S.H.I.E.L.D. and said, "Isn't the materials you use for your armor of the highest quality?" Hearing Tony's words, S.H.I.E.L.D. said to Tony while watching the battle between Hulk and Abomination in the middle of the field, "But I do have some Vibranium somewhere." "But I have money." Tony Stark's eyes lit up when he heard S.H.I.E.L.D. say he had some Vibranium in there. What is Vibranium? Tony Stark is all too familiar. Immediately stretched out his hand and pulled S.H.I.E.L.D.'s arm. He said excitedly, "Man, how much money will do? Give me some Vibranium." "It's not about money." Looking at the excited Tony Stark, S.H.I.E.L.D. spread his hands and said, "You know, the number of Vibranium is very rare even if it is a shield and Kong busy, man, for the sake of us being best friends, and am I not also a consultant to S.H.I.E.L.D.? After hearing S.H.I.E.L.D. say that it's not about money, Tony Stark immediately grabbed S.H.I.E.L.D.'s arm and won't let go. "Look, man, we're best friends, aren't we?" Looking at S.H.I.E.L.D., Tony Stark said with a serious expression, "Right." Hearing Tony's words, S.H.I.E.L.D. nodded. "My dad is also one of the founders of Aegis, right?" "That's right. I'm still the advisor of S.H.I.E.L.D., and also your personal advisor, right?" "There's nothing wrong with saying that. Then why can't you give me some Vibranium? Maybe I can use Vibranium to research some other elements." It's like when my dad wanted to study the super soldier serum, but he made a mistake and turned Steve Rogers into a legendary hero. Hearing Tony's words, S.H.I.E.L.D. corrected. In fact, the original researcher of the super soldier serum was not Mr. Howard, but Dr. Erkins. And the people who used the serum were not only Steve Rogers, but also... I do not care. Before S.H.I.E.L.D. could finish his correction, Tony Stark said righteously, "I need some Vibranium anyway, not a lot, just a little bit. For friend's sake." Seeing Tony Stark's serious expression at the moment, S.H.I.E.L.D. was silent for a moment, and then said, as a friend, "I really want to give you some Vibranium, but as the person in charge of the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch, I absolutely can't give it to you. But if you don't want to use Vibranium to make a private armor, but want to do some research, after all, you are now an advisor to the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch, so?" "That's right." Tony Stark felt that Vibranium was hopeless after hearing S.H.I.E.L.D.'s previous words. But after hearing the words behind S.H.I.E.L.D., Tony Stark's eyes lit up. He nodded hastily and then said righteously, "As a consultant of the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch, I am qualified to help S.H.I.E.L.D. conduct research. Whether it's because of my status as a consultant or because I'm Howard Stark's son, I should do my best to help S.H.I.E.L.D. research find better materials. After all, the Aegis is my father's whole life. How can I hide it?" Listening to Tony Stark's righteous words, S.H.I.E.L.D. also nodded seriously. "Yes, that's the truth, you see. As the person in charge of the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch, how could I not want to see that S.H.I.E.L.D. is facing a better way to develop? So you want to study the application for Vibranium materials? And I agree. But Vibranium is the strongest metal on Earth after all. Even if there is no breakthrough in research, it is normal, so you don't have to worry about it. That's right, that's it. For a while, both S.H.I.E.L.D and Tony Stark were very satisfied with each other's answers. Only General Ross on the side, constantly pouting. Sure enough, the people of Aegis are a bunch of shameless guys. Obviously one is for himself, and the other is for favoritism as a friend. But how could he be able to say such a righteous and awe-inspiring thing? Snort. Aegis people are a bunch of shameless people. But, Vibranium, I really want to own it. I said, should the two of you focus on the battle, Hulk is clearly at a disadvantage. Although I don't want to pay attention to these two guys, Ross still reminded. As Ross's voice fell, Hulk at this moment has been defeated by the hatred. After all, the current Hulk is not the Hulk in its heyday. Even if it was placed in the Avengers Alliance, it can definitely defeat the hatred. But now, it's clear that Hulk isn't ready to fight the abomination. Seeing this scene, S.H.I.E.L.D turned his head and glanced at Carl. Clear. After receiving S.H.I.E.L.D's eyes, Carl nodded immediately and then ran towards the building with his subordinates. As Carl took the people away, Ross frowned at S.H.I.E.L.D and asked, "What do you want to do?" "Tell you, hatred is not something that ordinary people can deal with, even if it is the strength of your Aegis. You don't have to worry about this, General Ross. Our Aegis naturally has our way. And since Dr. Banner is our Aegis, then Hulk is naturally our Aegis. We don't watch our own people get beaten and stay indifferent." Having said that, S.H.I.E.L.D moved his muscles and bones, and then Tony Stark on the side also closed his armor. A war? As the armor slowly lifted off the ground, Tony Stark looked at S.H.I.E.L.D and asked, "Battle. Solve the battle as quickly as possible." While speaking, S.H.I.E.L.D also slowly lifted into the air, and then suddenly charged in the direction of Abomination and Hulk. Chapter 60. Roar. Hulk, who was knocked back by Abomination's punch, suddenly let out an angry roar, then clenched his fist and charged towards Abomination again with red eyes. It can be seen that Hulk's anger has reached a critical point because he has been beaten all the time. Looking at Hulk rushing towards him, he hated that ugly monster-like face, showing a trace of sarcasm. Just about to taunt at Hulk, but then a small rocket shot directly at him. His face. Before he could react, this small rocket exploded directly, and the hatred affected by the explosion took a few steps back. He raised his head suddenly, looking at Tony Stark in steel armor in the sky. A cold and vicious expression flashed in his hatred eyes. Then he jumped up in place, trying to catch Tony Stark from a height of more than 10 meters and tear this damn sneaker to pieces. But before the hatred jumped to Tony Stark's side, a figure in the air rushed over in an instant. Its speed was so fast that even the hatred didn't have time to react, and the extremely sharp kick directly kicked the hatred's shoulder. Boom. 35 with this extremely sharp foot on his shoulders. The hatred that just jumped up was uncontrollable and fell directly to the ground. With its own weight and the strength of S.H.I.E.L.D's volley, it smashed the ground directly. Before Abomination stood up, the next moment the miniature cannonballs on the shoulders of Tony Stark's armor fired and attacked directly at Abomination, who fell to the ground. In an instant, a series of explosions occurred around Abomination. This sudden attack made hatred subconsciously protect his eyes, but the pain caused by the explosion made hatred reach its peak in an instant. Just before he could stand up, Hulk jumped in place with a roar, and then his fists were like heavy hammers, smashing directly on Abomination's body. Crack, crack, accompanied by a crisp click sound. The bones of the hatred shoulders were smashed in an instant. The severe pain made Abomination roar, opening his mouth and wanting to bite at Hulk. Facing the bloody mouth of hatred, even Hulk, who was in anger, avoided it subconsciously. Just when Hulk was dodging, Abomination wanted to take the opportunity to get up, but S.H.I.E.L.D, who fell from the sky, smashed his knees to the ground again. Crack. This heavy blow is no lighter than Hulk's punches, and the sound of bones shattering can be clearly seen. Seeing the helper, Hulk, who was originally angry, grinned suddenly, then clenched his fists and punched S.H.I.E.L.D, constantly smashing it towards hatred. For a while, the hated that fell to the ground had no way to get up at all, and could only let S.H.I.E.L.D's fists like a storm, and Hulk's huge amounts of fists constantly attack, like a boat that keeps swaying in the wind and rain. No matter how hard you struggle, your hatred never gets up. Hi. 35 looking at the middle of the field. The cooperation between S.H.I.E.L.D and Hulk made the hatred unable to resist. Ross rubbed his cheeks, A shock flashed in his eyes. He still understands the power of hatred, but now, such a powerful hater is like a child without any ability to fight back, allowing S.H.I.E.L.D and Hulk to beat him. This is unimaginable for Ross. There was even a moment when Ross wanted to disregard S.H.I.E.L.D's identity as the person in charge of the Aegis, capture him, and conduct research. After all, being able to maintain reason and maintain the appearance of a human being can still possess such a powerful strength. This is the perfect research object. Pity. The thought of Aegis gives Ross a headache. Well, the people of Aegis are not only so shameless, they are also very powerful. In the middle of the arena, S.H.I.E.L.D and Hulk pressed the hatred to the ground together, and finally roared angrily with red eyes. Immediately, he flicked his tail and attacked S.H.I.E.L.D fiercely. In his opinion, Hulk's defense is similar to his own. Only by knocking out the weakest guy first can he get up from the ground. In the face of Abomination's fierce tail attack, which was as sharp as the wind, S.H.I.E.L.D immediately evaded towards a teleportation. At the same time, after receiving the news from Carl and the others in the headset, they immediately said to Hulk, who was still attacking and hating, "Hulk, dodge." Hulk, who was playing excitedly, was stunned when he heard S.H.I.E.L.D shouting. In his opinion, he had been beaten several times just now, and now is the time for revenge. Why should he give up such a good opportunity? But listening to S.H.I.E.L.D shouting, he subconsciously glanced at S.H.I.E.L.D. Although Hulk's IQ is not high at this moment, he knows that the person flying in the air in front of him is his friend. He is a good man, so you should listen to him. So although he was very unwilling, after punching the hatred with force, he immediately got up and took a few steps back, watching S.H.I.E.L.D and Hulk leave in an instant. Hatred didn't know what was going on, but he got up immediately. Ask for Flowers 0, this is a great opportunity to fight back. I must tear up that damned Hulk, the guy who kicked himself in the air, and the guy who blew himself up in a tin suit. Just got up, before Abomination swung its tail to attack. The next moment several arrows slammed towards Abomination. Feeling that the arrows that cut through the air were attacking towards him, the hatred waved huge amounts of both hands and grabbed the arrows directly. Boom. I didn't wait until I hated and laughed at the time when I wanted to hurt myself with such a small attack. The arrow suddenly exploded, and then a light blue liquid splashed directly on the hated body. With the appearance of the blue liquid, Abomination did not wait for a reaction, but saw S.H.I.E.L.D standing in the air, and two flames suddenly appeared in the palm of his hand. The rising flames ignited, as if the surrounding air was scorched and twisted. As the flames attacked the Abomination, the blue liquid met the flames and burned violently in an instant. Roar. Feel the raging fire burning on your body, and the hatred wants to put out this fire with both hands. But how can the flame at this moment be comparable to ordinary flames? No matter how hatred beats, lying on the ground and rolling, the flame is always burning. Hearing the roar of hatred burning with flames, even Hulk couldn't help but take a few steps back. There was also a frightened expression in the pair of big eyes. Although his IQ is not high, Hulk can feel how dangerous this flame is. Hissed. At this moment, Ross really had a toothache after watching this scene. Originally, according to his idea, after the people of Aegis S.H.I.E.L.D teamed up with Hulk to defeat the Abomination, he could still recover the Abomination and continue his research. After all, hatred was researched by people like myself. Even if he will be held accountable, at least, S.H.I.E.L.D can't grab the results of his own research, even if the results were defeated by their shots. But now, looking at the picture of the continuous rolling and finally losing the strength, the fire is still burning continuously. How can this be recycled? What's the point of recycling a pile of ashes? Damn it, as expected, the people of Aegis are shameless. In order not to allow themselves to continue their research, they actually used such vicious methods. However, this can be considered to help myself. 8. Chapter 61. Well, it cannot be denied that although these guys in Aegis are shameless, they are not the same as themselves. But in the end, it still helped me a lot. Perhaps this is one of the responsibilities of S.H.I.E.L.D, but in any case, if S.H.I.E.L.D, the person in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D, did not take action, the hatred would be completely solved. Then, according to the strength of the hatred, more damage must be done in New York. At that time, he will not only be dismissed and held accountable, well, though the young head of S.H.I.E.L.D helped himself. But if you want to let yourself come forward to thank you, it is absolutely impossible, never. Sundara snorted. Ross looked at S.H.I.E.L.D, who was slowly floating down from the air, and then said, You have completely destroyed my experimental body. 35. But for the sake of your contribution, I won't care so much about May 20th with you. But hatred almost destroyed this block, and even the 3 surrounding blocks. This matter doesn't need to be handled by your Aegis people. I will issue an order to restore this place before I am dismissed, and at the same time those who have been hurt will compensate. After speaking, Ross looked S.H.I.E.L.D up and down, and after a trace of regret flashed in his eyes, Tsundere snorted softly and led the people to turn around and leave. Watching Ross ordered his soldiers to leave, Tony Stark also controlled the armor to slowly land. By the way, why didn't I find out before that the old guy Ross is such a tsundere? Do you think he has reacted? Our Aegis helped him by taking action to solve the hatred, lest he be held accountable even more. Hearing Tony's words, S.H.I.E.L.D nodded lightly. It should be, otherwise he wouldn't leave with people easily, and said that the post-disaster reconstruction and compensation are their responsibility. 35. The subtext of this sentence is that he will bear this matter, and it has nothing to do with our Aegis. 9. Originally, it has nothing to do with our Aegis. After all, the hatred was created by his laboratory, not by our Aegis. Watching S.H.I.E.L.D say this, Tony Stark curled his lips and said, "But you have to be careful. Ross gave you a regret look before leaving. According to what I know about this guy, it is obviously a pity that he is not his research material. Otherwise, if he can bring you into the laboratory, then he must be able to create a lot of super soldiers that are comparable to your ability on a large scale." Hearing Tony Stark say this, S.H.I.E.L.D smiled and shook his head. "Don't worry, not to mention whether they have the ability or not. The reality is that he doesn't dare to do it, and even the person who succeeds him doesn't dare to do it. 5. After all, Aegis and they are not on the same path, and even if they are stronger, they absolutely dare not provoke Aegis easily. Especially set the target on me, the person in charge of the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. After finishing speaking, S.H.I.E.L.D turned his head and looked at Hulk, who clenched his fists and looked a little indignantly at the ground, who hated ashes. Immediately raised his head and patted Hulk's arm lightly. "Hey, big guy, we're going home." Originally, Hulk, who had been staring at the ashes on the ground, was taken aback by S.H.I.E.L.D's sudden pat on the arm, just about to turn around with his fist clenched to fight back. When he saw that this person was S.H.I.E.L.D, he immediately released his fist, opened his mouth and smiled at S.H.I.E.L.D. Seeing Hulk's actions, S.H.I.E.L.D also had a smile on his face. Very good. Both Dr. Banner and now Hulk have an excellent impression of themselves. It's not easy. Especially Dr. Banner. In the original movie universe, he hid in a very poor and backward place. Now, he is still very satisfied with the Aegis building. As Carl and the others came down, the Quinjet began to be activated. S.H.I.E.L.D turned his head and glanced at the cluttered streets around him, then took Tony and Hulk to board the Quinjet again and flew towards the Aegis building. Very good. The post-disaster reconstruction department of S.H.I.E.L.D is not used, which is also a large amount of money left. After all, the S.H.I.E.L.D branch in New York is now under its own control, so saving some is good. Even if the funding of the New York S.H.I.E.L.D branch is 3 times the annual funding of other places. Aegis Trident headquarters. Does it mean that if I don't come to your office, you will never come to my office? Looking at Nick Fury in front of him, Alexander Pierce asked with a smile. "You know, Pierce, I'm busy." Looking at Alexander Pierce in front of him, Nick Fury looks the same as usual when they meet. But in my heart, I can't wait to raise my fist and punch this smiling face fiercely. Damn be asterisk 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 D. This damn Hydra boss. In vain. I once trusted him so much that I was even willing to stop that damn bullet for him. But even so, even if he hated this so much in his heart, he used to trust him so much that he could even become the master of Divine S.H.I.E.L.D because he was a guy with great power. Nick Fury can only look the same with his emptiness and condescension. After all, I haven't investigated clearly how much Hydra is in the Aegis before the power of Hydra has penetrated to that point. I can't rashly turn my face with him. The penetration of Hydra and Aegis is already so terrifying. What about the military, conference, business, etc.? Nick Fury is not difficult to guess. Hydra has been quietly hidden in every corner. So, until I can't be sure that Hydra can be completely wiped out in one fell swoop, I can only endure it. Otherwise, it is not just the Aegis that will face disaster. Looking at the 0.8 smile that I thought was kinder and more trustworthy in the past, but now I feel a little disgusting. Nick Fury whispered, "Even if I didn't go to your office, wouldn't you come to see me? How can it be the same? Nick, as a friend for so many years, you can't always let me come and see you." Having said that, Alexander Pierce opened a bottle of red wine without any politeness as if he was in his own office. First a glass for myself, then a glass for Nick Fury. After thinking about it, I looked at Maria Hill on the side. After seeing Maria Hill again and shaking his head to express his rejection, Alexander Pierce said with his usual smile, "As the boss of Aegis, your wine is better. 35, so much better than the drinks in my office, at least in terms of vintage." Chapter 62. If you like it, then take it back and drink it. After all, if it's just a few bottles of wine, it's not breaking the rules. Listening to Alexander Pierce, Nick Fury said, "Forget it. You can keep it for yourself. After all, I know that you have to drink a few glasses every night before you can sleep peacefully." Waving his hand and rejecting Nick Fury's offer, Alexander Pierce sat opposite Nick Fury. Then he smiled and asked, "I heard about Captain Steve Rogers. God, I can't imagine that someone who was identified as missing and sacrificed 70 years ago is still alive. You know, I was taken aback when I heard the news. You know, Nick, I'm a Captain Rogers fan. So if it wasn't for It's Too Late, I'd even want to call you and see Captain Rogers in person." Hearing Alexander Pierce's words, Nick Fury nodded with a smile. But he didn't take 28 seriously in his heart, and even thought it was the funniest joke he had ever heard in his life. Well, the leader of S.H.I.E.L.D is a fan of Captain America. TSK. Could there be a funnier joke than this? I didn't expect the news that Captain Rogers was still alive. So after hearing the news, I contacted our people as soon as possible to transport Captain Rogers back. Then you will also send the sleeping captain to New York. It seemed like a bit of blame, but also a bit of regret looking at Nick Fury. I know, after the sleeping captain was sent to the New York S.H.I.E.L.D branch, but I feel very sorry. 99 after all. If you can't see the captain in the first place, it would be a pity if it were anyone else. Speaking of which, Alexander Pierce seemed to have thought of something, and couldn't help looking at Nick Fury and smiled. By the way, I remember Phil Coulson is also a big fan of Captain Rogers. He wasn't clamoring to go to Guardians of New York to recover? He did make this request, but I rejected it. Hearing Alexander Pierce's question, Nick Fury also laughed. Where did I send Captain Rogers to New York for resuscitation? On the one hand, it's because only Sue is more suitable to appease Captain Rogers, who has been dormant for 70 years. After all, I think you know the same about Sue's ability and character. Seeing Pierce nodding his head, Nick Fury continued. Besides, the New York S.H.I.E.L.D branch is full of young people, and needs some experienced people to help. I don't think this guy is a better fit than Captain Rogers. As long as Captain Rogers gets used to the world, then he will definitely be Sue's best helper. Besides, Tony Stark is still in New York, and as Mr. Howard's son, I think he will also help make Captain more comfortable in this new world. After all, Steve Rogers was one of Mr. Howard's few close friends. Hearing Nick Fury's words, Alexander Pierce pouted, but didn't say much. Tony Stark, that cynical B******************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** Rogers fit into the world better? By that guy's character, he'd be fine without hitting Steve Rogers. You clearly said that you want to integrate Captain Rogers into the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch, and you want to help that young man Sue to pave the way to become the master of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the future. 35 old friends for so many years, who doesn't know what each other thinks? And I still have to hide it. Listening to Alexander Pierce's words, Nick Fury also laughed. Yes, I do have this idea. Just like you supported me back then, Pierce, now, it's time for me to help this kid Sue to pave the way. After a few more years, when he becomes more mature, I should give him the Aegis completely. After all, I always have to find a suitable replacement for Aegis. 35. Who else is more suitable than this child that I personally brought into Aegis? 35. After hearing Nick Fury's very clear and neat admission, Alexander Pierce suddenly laughed. That's right. As the controller of S.H.I.E.L.D., it is a natural responsibility to find the next successor. Just like back then, I fully supported you to become the next controller of Aegis. With that said, Alexander Pierce raised his glass and gave Nick Fury a light touch. In fact, this time I came to Nick Fury for a test. Although S.H.I.E.L.D. will analyze that putting Steve Rogers on the S.H.I.E.L.D. branch in New York is Nick Fury paving the way for the future of that young man Su-Che. But Alexander Pierce always felt a little uneasy. But with this test, Pierce feels that he can rest assured. Nick Fury is still the same as before, whether it is his attitude or anything he is willing to tell himself. Always the same, no change. Well, it seems that everything is overthinking it. After chatting for a while, watch Alexander Pierce leave. Maria Hill whispered, I know it's impossible, but I can't help but worry that you're going to punch Pierce in the face. I'm not that bad. Listening to Hill's 520 words, Nick Fury looked in the direction of the door. His eyes flashed a little cold. This is the guy whom I was extremely grateful and trusted. I just hope now that Captain Steve Rogers wakes up soon and safely. As for the rest, take your time. One day, we will completely wipe out those guys who should have been thrown into the garbage heap 70 years ago. At the same time, the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch, the special consultation room. His vital signs have gradually stabilized now. 35 looking at Su-Che in front of him, Natasha Romanoff looked at the instrument and then smiled at Su-Che. Although I don't know when he will wake up, I think this time should not be far away. However, it's really incredible that a guy who has been frozen for 70 years is still able to wake up. I also think it's incredible, so I want to do some research, but I was stopped by Sue. Tony Stark, who was on the side, also crossed his arms and said after hearing the words of the widow sister. Hearing Tony's words, Dr. Banner, who was standing on the other side of Su-Che, turned his head and pouted. Oh, do you want to study that? But I just want to find an excuse to take revenge. I'm the most curious one. Oh, what a pity. I really want to study it. Chapter 63. As for the malicious from the outside world, mainly the malicious of Tony and Dr. Banner, Steve Rogers does not know. At this moment, as his consciousness gradually recovered, he only felt an unprecedented slight warmth. The wind blew through the curtains, making a salsa sound. The warm sunshine faced the Perseverance with a hint of handsome face. Made Steve Rogers feel very comfortable. It really seems to be a good night's sleep. If it wasn't for a bunch of people making noises in my ears, then I seem to be sleeping for a while with my eyes closed. It seems that since the super soldier serum, I have never really rested again. Steve. In the hazy consciousness, a voice seemed to gently call out to him. That familiar and pleasant voice was Peggy, the girl I love the most. A valiant face appeared in Steve's subconscious, making Steve, who wanted to continue sleeping for a while, suddenly wake up. I can't just fall asleep like this. I still owe her a date. The intense consciousness made Steve Rogers' heart beat, and then his eyelids slowly opened. Peggy. Subconsciously, Roar called out the name of the girl he loved the most, but just opened his eyes, but saw several faces surrounding him, looking down at him. Steve Rogers, who had just opened his eyes, was startled by this weird scene, and subconsciously wanted to stretch out his fist to attack. After all, no matter who has just woken up, a few unfamiliar faces will be slammed over, and they will be shocked. If it weren't for the extremely strong control, he would have retracted his fist halfway. Then Steve Rogers' fist will definitely hit the guy closest to him with a curious face. Scare me. Looking at Steve Rogers, who just woke up, suddenly slammed his fist into his face. Tony Stark was startled and took a step back. Dude, didn't I just say I wanted to do some research on you? Dude, don't you want to punch me as soon as you wake up? Silently looked at Steve Rogers, who was at a loss at the moment. Immediately, Tony looked at everyone proudly and said, Look, what did I say? I said I have a way to wake him up as soon as possible. I knew that if you kept roaring him with Aunt Peggy's voice, he would definitely wake up. Looking at Tony Stark with a smug face, Su-Che pursed his lips and then gave Tony Stark a thumbs up. I didn't expect this guy to be out of tune sometimes, but his suggestions are really good. Just now, Tony Stark said that the quickest way to wake Steve Rogers is to use Ms. Peggy's voice to roar him. Although I don't know if it is useful, Su-Che still asked the headquarters to send the audio of Ms. Peggy when she was young. Unexpectedly, after less than 5 minutes, this guy Steve Rogers actually came to his senses. Although I don't know if the blind cat hit the dead mouse, or Tony's suggestion really works, but at least, Steve Rogers really woke up. Here. Where? Who are you? Steve Rogers, who sat up from the medical bed, looked around blankly. Everything around is so unfamiliar, but so peculiar. It seems to be a lot more prosperous than the world in my impression. Especially around me, those instruments that I have never seen before. Oh, by the way, the last impression is of driving a large fighter plane into the iceberg. It should be that Howard and Peggy found themselves and were in a coma for a long time. So these instruments were invented by Howard. I don't know if his levitating car has actually been developed. Peggy. She would be very happy when she heard that she was awake. Turning his head and looking at the people around him. Although they were dressed very formally, Steve Rogers didn't feel any malice from them. At least, the young man with a warm, sunny smile and an oriental face at the head gives a very good impression. That's why I didn't panic. I didn't wake up in a strange environment and immediately guard against counterattack. Looking at Steve Rogers sitting on the medical bed, although a little dazed, but not a little panicked. The smile on Su-Che's face was still so warm. Sure enough, under the huge amounts of goodwill unleashed by his mental power, Steve Rogers didn't look as wary as he did in the movie, then pushed people away and ran out. Definitely, it has something to do with that repeating baseball game broadcast too. Welcome back to this world, Mr. Steve Rogers. Looking at Steve Rogers, Su-Che said with a smile, I thought you would wake up in a few days. So many preparations were not used in time. But it doesn't matter. As you can see, the world in front of you is the real world. Welcome you with the real world. I think this is better than creating an unreal world for you. Looking at the young man with a warm smile in front of him, Steve Rogers didn't understand. What is the real world? What is an imaginary world? Before Steve Rogers could speak, Su-Che continued. Originally, the headquarters suggested that I change the consultation room to a 70-year-old style, but I don't think that's necessary. Although ordinary people can't accept the reality all of a sudden, but I think you should be able to. Who told you to be Steve Rogers? Introduce yourself. My name is Su-Che, and I'm the head of the S.H.I.E.L.D. branch in New York. Captain Rogers, welcome to the new world in 70 years. Looking at Su-Che's outstretched hand, Steve Rogers stretched out his hand in a dazed way and shook Su-Che lightly. Thank you. Wait, you mean the new world in 70 years? Hearing Su-Che's words, Steve Rogers' heart beat violently. A ridiculous but real feeling suddenly filled Steve Rogers' heart. Subconsciously, he turned his head and looked at the middle-aged Lee Heo, who was pouting but had a smug look on his face. If I remember correctly, this guy should have said Aunt Peggy just now. Peggy? Aunt? If this middle-aged man called Peggy an aunt, then at this moment, suddenly getting up from the medical bed, Steve Rogers quickly came to the window, opened the curtain in front of him, and then looked out. As far as the eyes can see, it is full of traffic. The jagged high-rise buildings, the huge amounts of posters on the buildings, the brand-new screens playing advertisements. Everything makes Steve Rogers feel a little hard to roar suck. 70 years? But Roar took a few breaths, and a mood of melancholy and sadness gradually spread in Steve Rogers' heart. Although I want to tell myself that everything I see is fake, but everything in front of me is so real. I seem to have missed a date. Chapter 64. Yes, Nick, Captain Steve Rogers is sober. In the corridor, watching Nick Fury in the video, Su-Che said with a smile. I didn't show any excitement. I just couldn't believe that I was frozen for 70 years. 35, get used to it slowly. You have to let him gradually get used to this world. After all, whoever finds himself in a coma for 70 years, I'm afraid he won't be able to accept it for a while. Don't worry, he won't do anything drastic. Looking at the video, Nick Fury kept saying all kinds of things that could happen. Su-Che all laughed and refuted. It's not that Nick Fury doesn't trust himself, but it's clear that Nick Fury is a little excited about Steve Rogers coming back to life. If it were normal times, Nick Fury would be a little excited, but not so. But after all, at the moment is different from that time. You must know that Nick Fury is under a lot of pressure now. After all, in the face of Hydra who has penetrated his aegis, Nick Fury naturally has a lot of pressure. Especially the more investigation, the more shocking the situation. Steve Rogers' recovery at this time is undoubtedly an exciting thing. In fact, the 523 that Su-Che admires the most is still at the juncture of knowing about S.H.I.E.L.D, but still puts himself in the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch and does not move. If it is someone else, then it is estimated that the person with the most trust and the strongest ability will definitely investigate Hydra at headquarters. But Nick Fury didn't do that. A discerning person will think that Nick Fury is paving the way for himself. In fact, Nick Fury doesn't want the dirty water of Hydra to get on his body. He knew that the day he destroyed Hydra was when he stepped down as S.H.I.E.L.D. boss. Even if he wants to be re-elected, the World Security Council will not allow consent. Therefore, at this point in time, he will be dispatched to take charge of one party. He even assigned all the people in the Eagle's Nest that he knew and trusted to himself. First, he will not be affected by S.H.I.E.L.D, and secondly, he will also be able to successfully take over Aegis in the future. Definitely, it is not ruled out that when the decisive battle is launched at the headquarters of Trident Building, the New York Aegis branch led by him will become the absolute trump card in this battle. No matter what, Nick Fury did what he wanted to do. So what happens next is up to God. After hanging up the video, watch Natasha Romanoff come out of the special consultation room. Su-Che smiled and asked, "How's it going?" Already believe it, but still a little unwilling to accept it. It may take a while. Hearing Su-Che's question, Natasha Romanoff leaned against the wall and looked at Su-Che. It's understandable, but the most important thing right now is not to keep him locked in the consultation room. 9. If his physical skills are all right, then let him see this new world. Otherwise, I'm worried that once the time goes on, excessive depression will make him go crazy, even if he has a strong ability to bear it. 35. But after all, he just recovered from the ice. None of us can guarantee that, can we? Hearing what Natasha Romanoff said, Su-Che nodded in approval. During this period of time, let me take him to familiarize himself with the world. Nah, originally I wanted you to show him the world. I'm not suitable. Hearing Su-Che's words, Sister Widow smiled and shook her head. Sister, the smell of blood on my body is too heavy. It will remind him of those bad things. 35. You are different, Sue. Your warm personality will make him accept the world subtly. This is the most important thing. I don't want to let this guy who has been sleeping for 70 years think back to the past when I take him on a mission, and then he has some traumatic syndrome or something. Saying that, Natasha Romanoff wrapped her arms around Su-Che's neck, and then smiled affectionately. I will hand over this frozen hero to you, and I will not take a vacation for my sister during this time. 99. Don't worry. The sister here at the Aegis building will help you watch. There will be no problems. And it's not that you don't come back every day, but let's say it first, until he gets used to the world. 39. You must be rejecting the girlfriend that my sister introduced to you. At the age of 22, you have to find a girlfriend. Listen to Natasha Romanoff, once again, as usual, embarking on her own matchmaking journey. Su-Che smiled helplessly. Nah, if you can introduce a girlfriend to Steve successfully, then maybe he will integrate into this new world more quickly. Cut. Listening to Su-Che's disguised refusal, Natasha Romanoff opened his mouth and bit Su-Che's arm lightly. Then he snorted softly. This guy is all about Ms. Peggy. How can I introduce him to a girlfriend? Okay, let's go. I will come to work tomorrow. After speaking, he waved his hand to Su-Che, and Natasha Romanoff left immediately. Watching Natasha Romanoff leave, Su-Che tidied up his clothes and walked towards the special consultation room. Although, you are Howard's only son, but my subconscious tells me that your thoughts are not simple. 35. In the clinic. Listening to Tony Stark's proposal, Steve Rogers subconsciously refused to shake his head and said, although I don't know, 70 years later, what is the difference between today and my world? 99. But I know Howard very well, and he has joked more than once that he wants to do some research on me like that. So you're very much like your father in this regard, even making the same excuses. Listening to Steve Rogers' words, Tony Stark immediately spread his hands. Good guy. Who said that the guy who has been frozen for 70 years is so deceiving? Turning his head to look at Dr. Banner, Tony Stark said with his venomous tongue, it seems that Frozen has slept for so long, but his brain has not been frozen. It's obviously your excuse is bad. And Captain Rogers just froze and slept for 70 years, not his brain for 70 years, so how could he easily believe such a bad excuse? Dr. Banner, who has long been acquainted with Tony, immediately launched a counterkill as soon as he opened his mouth. Damn. 35. Facing Drive Banner's counterkill, Tony Stark rolled his eyes. Listening to the two of them, Steve, who had just woken up and looked a little gloomy because of all this, also showed a smile. This scene reminded him of Howard and their bickering at the beginning. It seems that Tony, who seems to be older than himself, is very similar to his father. They are all using this relatively stupid method to relieve the depression in other people's hearts. It's just, I can't go back to the past. Chapter 65. Aegis Building. On the rooftop, the bleak wind blew through, making Su-Che's black windbreaker rustle. It's almost autumn, so the wind temperature on the rooftop has dropped a bit, but the warm sunshine dissolves the coldness brought by the autumn wind. Enjoying the warmth of the sun and listening to the wind that is not cold, it can be said that this is a unique scenery in autumn. Only standing tall can you see farther. Sometimes you are in a bad mood, so you might as well look into the distance. The azure blue sky can accommodate anything, even giants, but they are extremely small between heaven and earth, so nothing is impossible. Standing on the rooftop, looking out into the distance, watching the melancholy Steve Rogers flash between his eyebrows, Su-Che said with a smile. This sentence was said by Hill and me back then. Although my mission was accomplished very well, it also led to some accidents. Hearing Su-Che's words, Steve Rogers took a few steps forward and sat on the edge of the Aegis building. As far as I can remember, this place was not so prosperous, especially compared to New York, which is so colorful now. 39. New York in my time was more like a black and white picture. Definitely, I don't mean that we didn't have color at that time, but it all seemed like a dream. It's more prosperous here, with bigger TVs and more cars. It's just that I'm not used to it. Look at Steve Rogers as he sits on the edge of the building and looks into the distance. Listening to his words, Tony Stark on the side shrugged his shoulders and complained, "Man, if all this has not changed, then we have worked hard for 70 years in vain? And I don't understand, with such a strong wind. Why do you have to come to the rooftop where you want to go? Won't the four of us just go directly? See clearly. See clearly." Facing Tony's complaints, Steve Rogers shook his head slightly. He took a deep breath and looked at the familiar, yet unfamiliar world. He suddenly turned his head to look at S.H.I.E.L.D. and asked, "Do people still dance now? I mean, do people still get together and make an appointment to dance?" "Yes, I'm not so sure." Seeing Steve questioning himself, S.H.I.E.L.D. also came to the edge of the Aegis building and sat down. Looking at Steve, who was still looking at himself, S.H.I.E.L.D. shook his head slightly. "I don't know, or I'm not sure. Since I entered the Aegis Eagle's Nest when I was 10 years old, I have spent the whole 12 years in the Aegis. In the beginning, it was all kinds of training, and after becoming a member, it was all kinds of tasks. Definitely, because of my identity, I have naturally learned to dance, and I always have to integrate into different environments as soon as possible. So whether it is dancing, singing, equestrian, bowling, etc., everything, I will. But I haven't lived a life that belongs to me, an ordinary person. Never." Hearing S.H.I.E.L.D.'s words, Steve Rogers reached out his hand subconsciously, wanting to pat S.H.I.E.L.D.'s shoulder lightly. Those who have not tried to live for themselves can only say that they are a little sad. Such a life is not complete. But since knowing the S.H.I.E.L.D. duty, Steve Rogers feels that this is another group of respectable people. But before Steve wanted to comfort him, S.H.I.E.L.D. raised his hand, pointed to Tony Stark beside him, and said to Steve, "You can ask him. This guy used to be a cynical playboy, and he knows these things very well. Yes, when it comes to this, it is the field that is best at." Seeing that S.H.I.E.L.D. mentioned himself, Tony Stark nodded immediately and said proudly, "Just ask me. I'm very familiar with and good at dancing. Do you want to ask the serious one, or not?" "Tony, that's not what Captain Rogers meant." Seeing that Tony was about to be broad and crooked, Dr. Banner tightened his clothes, then looked at Steve with a hint of melancholy on his face and said, "Captain Rogers, people are dancing now. 35. When I was a professor, I often attended dinner parties, so ye often danced with others. That's how my ex-girlfriend met. Definitely, some things are in the past, but I really haven't been green." While speaking, Dr. Banner glanced at Tony and S.H.I.E.L.D. with some resentment. Looking at Dr. Banner's somewhat resentful eyes, S.H.I.E.L.D. and Tony instantly chose to ignore it. "Ignore these two bastards." Seeking Flower Zero, seeing the two people ignore his gaze, Dr. Banner carefully came to the edge of the rooftop and with the help of Steve Rogers, sat next to it. "It's still a little high, although I'm not afraid of heights, but I still look worried. But this slight stimulation should not let Hulk come out." "What is Hulk?" Hearing Dr. Banner's words, Steve Rogers asked curiously. It's a kind of monster, but it can't be called a monster, but it can be called a monster, but it's like talking about myself, how can I say it?" Seeing that Dr. Banner was a little confused, Tony Stark said directly to Steve, "Hulk is a cutie with infinite power. Trust me, Steve, you're going to love Hulk." "Really?" 35. Looking at Tony with a confident face, Steve Rogers always felt that something was not right. Especially looking around, Dr. Banner's face twitched because Tony said, "Hulk is a cutie." Steve Rogers seems to have some idea of what's going on. Although, until now, I don't know what Hulk is. Okay, the wind is blowing at noon, and the distance is standing on the roof to watch. Guys, shouldn't the four of us go out for a big meal? Just to hold a party so that Steve can return to this world. Anyway, instead of eating the working meal of the S.H.I.E.L.D. building, I propose to have a roast. Yes, Tony's treat, and no barbecue at noon. Before Tony Stark could finish speaking, S.H.I.E.L.D. interrupted directly. "Agreed? It's really a bit too tired to eat barbecue at noon. Captain Rogers, do you have anything to eat?" Dr. Banner on the side also nodded, agreeing with S.H.I.E.L.D.'s statement. "Lunch?" After a little thought, Steve Rogers' eyes suddenly lit up. "I think there really is a place I want to try. Depend on." Listening to the three people agreeing with their proposal to go out for a big meal, Let themselves treat themselves, but not let themselves decide what they want to eat. Tony immediately raised a middle finger to the three of them speechlessly. What kind of evil did you do yourself? How did you know these three guys? 8. Chapter 66. This is what you said. The place to eat? Brooklyn streets. Looking up at the sign of the laundry, Tony Stark turned his head to look at Steve Rogers and asked speechlessly, I didn't expect that this place has changed so much. Looking up at the laundromat sign, Steve's eyes flashed with disappointment. In the past, Bucky and I used to come here to eat often. We didn't have much money on us back then, but the burgers here were cheap and plentiful. And then, after I went to the front, I haven't been here. It's been 70 years in a flash, but many times, I miss the burgers here. Having said this, Steve Rogers took a deep breath, then turned his head to look at S.H.I.E.L.D. and smiled. Sorry, it seems that we went all in vain. You also know that 70 years have passed. How can there be no May 27th here? Tony said speechlessly, but after hearing Steve mention burgers, he immediately said, Speaking of hamburgers, I do know that there is a very delicious burger joint in New York. The cheeseburgers there taste really good. So man, if you want a burger, then… Steve didn't say he wanted a burger, he just missed it. Before Tony could finish speaking, S.H.I.E.L.D. interrupted directly. Since there is nothing to eat, then let's go to Chinese food. Or which one was last time? Che. It's obviously my treat, but he doesn't let me choose. It's really whatever. I'm going to eat that sweet and sour shredded pork today. After speaking to S.H.I.E.L.D. speechlessly, Tony Stark's eyes lit up when he mentioned the sweet and sour shredded pork. Seeing Tony's expression, the three of them also laughed. Immediately start the car and drive in the direction of the last Chinese restaurant. Actually, there is another reason to interrupt Tony's words. S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't say it. How could Steve Rogers not know that 70 years have passed and so many things have changed dramatically? The one he liked to eat at the time is probably long gone. But even knowing that, why did Steve Rogers have to come and see? Are you not giving up? Definitely not. Just because Brooklyn was his home. That's all. An hour later, inside the Chinese restaurant. Don't be envious. The ability of the Oriental people at that time. We have to practice slowly for a long time before we can be familiar with the use of chopsticks. 35 Passing a spoon to Captain America. Tony Stark said, Teach you a very good way to eat this fish. The sweet and sour shredded pork is covered with rice and eaten together. It tastes very delicious. 39 With that said, Tony Stark picked up a spoon and poured a layer of fish-flavored shredded pork over the rice, like a demonstration, and ate it in a big mouth. Watching Tony move, Steve nodded slightly. There is also a layer of vegetables poured over the rice. Just wanted to eat, but saw two people, S.H.I.E.L.D. and Dr. Banner, skillfully using chopsticks and eating gracefully. Looking at the graceful movements of the two using chopsticks, then at the spoon in his hand, he turned his head and looked at Tony's expression of nodding and complimenting as he pulled rice into his mouth regardless of his image. After thinking about it, Steve put down the spoon and picked up the chopsticks and started using it. Although he was a little unskilled at the beginning, Steve gradually became proficient. At least when the chopsticks pick up the dishes, they won't fall on the table. It didn't take long for Steve to learn how to use chopsticks. Tony, who was holding a spoon beside him, suddenly felt that the food in his hand was not fragrant. No, it doesn't matter if S.H.I.E.L.D. can use chopsticks proficiently. Dr. Banner has learned to understand after eating a few times. But you just got started. Why did you learn so fast? And it also looks the same. Just because you're a legendary hero who lives up to its reputation? But I'm still Iron Man. Put down the spoon in your hand and pick up the chopsticks in the plate. Tony, it doesn't matter if you can't learn it. No one will laugh at you with a spoon, knife, and fork. Watching Tony move, S.H.I.E.L.D. said with a smile. That's right, Tony, Sue is right. This thing depends on your ability. It doesn't mean that you are a genius and can do everything well. You'd better use a spoon, after all. Although you don't have much money, and it's your treat, it's a bad habit to waste. Looking at Tony holding chopsticks in his right hand and a bowl in his left, the dish fell on the table before it was caught in the bowl. Dr. Banner said immediately, Cut. As long as I want to learn, there's nothing I can't learn. I'm famous Tony Stark. 55 Even though I said that, but looking at myself, I still can't control chopsticks in a short time. Tony still practiced attentively and turned the subject. Sue, how are you going to arrange Steve? I know you will definitely arrange him to work in the Aegis building, but the place to live has to be settled first. You can't live in the S.H.I.E.L.D. staff's apartment like everyone else. It's not bad, but you should understand what I mean. So I suggest that the place to live is left to me. You know, I have a lot of houses in New York. 35 Hearing Tony's words, S.H.I.E.L.D looked at Steve, then smiled. Actually, when I received Steve again, I had already thought about everything. I'm going to put Steve next to my villa, a neighbor who can help each other. Na's there too. 39, and I can't live in the Aegis building all the time. Some time ago, I was busy with work, so I didn't go back. But now, I have sorted out all the top and bottom of the New York S.H.I.E.L.D branch, and I won't have to be so busy in the future. 35 Well, it's time to go back to live and become neighbors with Steve. Hearing S.H.I.E.L.D say this, Tony Stark rolled his eyes and didn't know what he was thinking, but the malicious smile on his face betrayed him. Seeing Tony looking at him with this smile, Dr. Banner instantly understood what Tony was thinking. Then he shook his head and said, I'll forget it. You know my situation. So the safest way is that I live in the Aegis building. And the conditions there are also very good. I don't want to accidentally destroy Sue and Steve's villa in Block 0.8. 35. Seeing Drive Banner shaking his head, Tony wasn't surprised. Then he hugged Dr. Banner's shoulders and smiled. With us here, what are you worried about, Banner? Trust me, we will help you. 99 Looking at the sincere Tony, Dr. Banner hesitation, and then shook his head. Forget it. I'm afraid the more you help things get bigger. Cut. You're boring. Seeing Dr. Banner express his refusal again, Tony clicked his mouth, then looked at S.H.I.E.L.D and said righteously, As a consultant of the New York S.H.I.E.L.D branch, I strongly request that you give me a house in your villa area. 99 It's best to be right next to you. It's really not good. Leave it to me. Let me take care of it for you. It's best to transform it into a base. Trust me, I'm the best at this kind of thing. Looking at S.H.I.E.L.D, Tony said seriously. Chapter 67. 3 days later. Morning. I can't do it. 99 With his hands on his knees, Tony Stark sucked in the fresh air while taking a big mouthful of roar, while looking at the two guys in front of him and said speechlessly, You too. You are all insane. Breaking into my villa at 5:30 in the morning and pulling me up to wash. How can you come out for a run so early in the morning? Even if you like to exercise in the morning, why do you have to call me? I won't say anything if you call me, but the two of you don't run like this. In just half an hour, both of you almost dropped me 3 laps. My God, I only ran about 4 miles, but you two perverts actually ran more than 20 miles. 99. You two are pure perverts. Not everyone has such good physical fitness as you. Speaking of which, Tony Stark looked at the two with a look of grief and indignation. And don't you know that the worst thing about running is to disrupt the rhythm? 35 Good guy. The two of you are fast, and you broke my slow rhythm. Does this keep people alive? Looking at the tired and panting Tony, S.H.I.E.L.D and Steve looked at each other, then shook their heads with a smile. Man, who asked you to be our neighbors? The 28 villas by the sea can't live, so you have to move to the villa area painted by our Aegis circle? If that's the case, forget it, and call Peepo. Since you and Peepo have confessed that you want to be together, then your physical fitness needs to be exercised. Otherwise, you and Peepo will really get married in the future. If you don't exercise your body well, how will you get a healthy baby? Listening to S.H.I.E.L.D's words, Tony Stark immediately hit back with a middle finger. Why do you think everyone is perverted like the two of you? People's physiques are different. If I don't wear the Mark armor, I'm just an ordinary person, okay? Although I'm smarter, it's also more intelligent, not physical. Taking a long sigh of relief and relieving the pain in his lungs, Tony Stark walked to a tree and sat down, looking at S.H.I.E.L.D and Steve who were about to continue running. Then he said speechlessly, I now understand why Dr. Banner is reluctant to move here. In just 3 days, you guys took me and ran for half a month. If it goes on like this, I'm afraid I will be exhausted by you two guys sooner or later. I don't care. I'm not running anyway. You two continue. Saying that, Tony Stark immediately closed his eyes and started playing dead. No matter what S.H.I.E.L.D and Steve promised, the two of them would slow down and run at his pace. Tony kept his eyes closed and pretended to be dead, just didn't answer the words of the two. Looking at Tony who was starting to cheat, S.H.I.E.L.D smiled and said to Steve, Let's just keep running. All right, it's 6:10, run 50 minutes in the morning, get 40 miles, then go back to dinner. 35 Honestly, I didn't expect Natasha Romanoff's breakfast to be this good. At least it was so much better than the breakfasts of my day. Listening to the conversation between the two, Tony Stark wanted to talk to Steve. How can the breakfast of your era be compared to the breakfast of this era? But he was afraid that he would open his eyes and be dragged by these two beasts to continue jogging. So I closed my eyes and pretended to be dead, and I would rather hold back and not complain and not open my mouth. After all, the lessons of these 2 days are enough to eat. Tony believes that as long as he opens his eyes, these two guys will definitely pull him up in the next second. Thinking of this, Tony Stark moved his body quietly, and then his hands tightly hugged the tree behind him. In this way, I expressed my determination that I absolutely do not want to continue running. Seeing that he deliberately said something that made Tony want to complain, but Tony resisted opening his eyes and even turned around and hugged the tree. Steve shrugged, looked at S.H.I.E.L.D. and smiled. It seems that Tony is really tired today and doesn't want to run anymore. Probably, it's just that he ran 5 miles yesterday morning, but he's only 4 miles today, so he's a little slack. It's not a good habit. Squinting and listening to the conversation between the two, Tony Stark subconsciously grabbed the tree he was holding in front of him. Humph, you won't let go if you kill yourself. Damn, if I knew this morning, I wouldn't open the door if I beat him to death. What? Moved from the villa area painted by Aegis Circle? Go back to your own seaside villa? Why? As a consultant of the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch, isn't it worth a villa? If you don't move, you won't move if you are killed. Seeing Tony's foolishness, S.H.I.E.L.D. and Steve looked at each other and started jogging. In the early autumn season, the early morning breeze is very cool, which is suitable for getting up in the morning and running in the morning. While jogging, Steve Rogers smiled at S.H.I.E.L.D. and said, I have already learned about the general household appliances in 3 days. However, I prefer the appliance that can be heated when taking a bath. It's really convenient, although there were also in the past, but it's a very primitive method. And that TV with a very big screen. My God, I've been watching TV for the past 3 days, so that I can learn through movies, some things I've missed in the past 70 years. But seriously, it's really convenient these days, and the food is better. But I want to say thank you most, not because of that. 35, it's because of that bed. Turning his head to look at S.H.I.E.L.D., Steve said with a smile on his face, I didn't think that, man. You even thought about the bed I would sleep in. I just slept on that very soft mattress, and I was really not used to it. I couldn't even fall asleep. I thought it was because I slept long enough. But since you got me a firmer bed yesterday, I found that I can actually fall asleep. 9,530, although inside the dream. Speaking of which, Steve took a deep breath and then continued. Stop talking about that, Sue. How strong are the people in the Aegis Tower? Are they all like us? 5 after all. I didn't expect your physical fitness to be so good, even better than mine. Is it because of the super soldier serum? Hearing Steve's question, S.H.I.E.L.D. jogged and replied with a smile. The other people in Aegis are more similar in strength to ordinary people. Although they are stronger than ordinary people, it is also because of training. As for me, my ability was born, not because of the super soldier serum. So Steve, don't underestimate yourself. After all, whether it's your strength or experience, where are you? What I value the most is actually the spirit in your original bones, which is not something ordinary people can possess. Looking at Steve, S.H.I.E.L.D. smiled and comforted. Behind, looking at the two people getting farther and farther away, Tony Stark breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, these two guys didn't pull themselves up to continue running today. I can't bear this kind of sin alone. No matter what you say, you have to deceive Dr. Banner over here. The four agreed. How could Dr. Banner be missing? Tony Stark's mouth cracked at the thought of Dr. Banner who would be fooled by him. Or the current life is more interesting. Chapter 68. Aegis Building. Barton has been transferred again. Sitting across from S.H.I.E.L.D., Natasha Romanoff peeled oranges and ate them while looking at S.H.I.E.L.D. and said, It took less than half a month to accompany Laura and her daughter, and I was transferred again. Did you hear any wind over there? Hearing Natasha Romanoff's question, S.H.I.E.L.D. shook his head, took the orange from Natasha Romanoff's hand, smiled and asked, Why, Laura complained to you? Not at all. Seeing S.H.I.E.L.D. asking, Natasha Romanoff did not hide. Laura knows the rules of our Aegis. After all, she was once a member of Aegis. It's just that now there's a baby, not like it used to be. So Laura is naturally a little worried when Barton is called off on a mission. Speaking of this, Natasha Romanoff suddenly laughed. Some time ago, Laura asked me how Carl and Susan are doing now. Luo, I am very relieved to hear that one is the head of the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. operation team, and the other is the head of the intelligence team. After all, Laura taught them for a while. Hearing Natasha Romanoff's words, S.H.I.E.L.D. looked at Natasha Romanoff curiously. You mean, Laura taught Carl and Susan? Why didn't I know? I came out of the same eagle's nest with Carl Susan. How come I don't remember being taught by Laura? You definitely don't know, because she didn't teach you at all. He picked up the fruit knife, divided the apple in the fruit bowl into two, and handed the larger half to S.H.I.E.L.D, although you and Carl Susan are in the same class. But then because you have always been the number one in all disciplines, you are pressing everyone down. 35. S.H.I.E.L.D was brought out of the eagle's nest half a year in advance by Nick, and brought him to teach him hand in hand. You graduated half a year early, and Laura has been teaching them for half a year. Having said that, Natasha Romanoff looked at S.H.I.E.L.D and raised her eyebrows. You should know, what is Laura's code name in Aegis? Mockingbird. 35. Hearing Natasha Romanoff's question, S.H.I.E.L.D answered directly. Yes, Laura's previous code name was Mockingbird, so you should know how good Laura is at intelligence. That's why Nick asked Laura, who was Mockingbird at the time, to teach the students of the Eagle's Nest. 35. With Erlang's legs crossed, Natasha Romanoff looked at S.H.I.E.L.D with a comfortable expression. You know what happened later? Laura and Barton came together. 39. So Laura naturally withdrew from the S.H.I.E.L.D, and even the current farm was found by Carl and Susan under the orders of Nick Fury. So Laura naturally cares about Carl and Susan, two former students. Hearing Natasha Romanoff say this, S.H.I.E.L.D nodded slightly. So you mean, Laura prefers Barton to stay at our S.H.I.E.L.D branch in New York, not the Trident building? That's what I meant. Seeing that S.H.I.E.L.D understood her subtext, Natasha Romanoff shrugged and said, No way, as a former member of Aegis, Laura naturally knows that it is equivalent to the Trident building, and it will be safer there. Actually, you and my sister and I are Barton's partners all these years, so Laura naturally believes in the two of us more. Plus, she also knows how much you were trusted by Nick. So I hope you can come forward and put Barton on the S.H.I.E.L.D branch in New York. After all, if you speak, then Nick will naturally not refuse at all. Although, from the first day of joining Aegis, all of us are ready to sacrifice for this world. But Laura doesn't want her daughter to be without a father. 35. Hearing Natasha Romanoff's words, S.H.I.E.L.D nodded in approval. In fact, Barton's current identity is still the agent of the New York S.H.I.E.L.D branch. It's just that it's still hanging at the Trident building headquarters. This means that, whether it is the Trident building headquarters or the New York Aegis branch, as long as Hawkeye is needed, he will execute it. And the task of headquarters takes priority over the task of the New York S.H.I.E.L.D branch. Unlike myself and Natasha Romanoff, although myself and Natasha Romanoff are also in the headquarters. But he is directly under the command of Nick alone, and Natasha Romanoff is completely in charge of himself. That is to say, even if Natasha Romanoff does not want to accept the order issued by the headquarters, then he can directly refuse for Natasha Romanoff as the person in charge of the New York S.H.I.E.L.D branch. Definitely, other Aegis divisions don't have this rule. Whoever made it, the New York S.H.I.E.L.D branch is the most important one among all branches. After a little thought, S.H.I.E.L.D turned on the computer and sent a video request to Nick Fury. In fact, after recovering from Captain America Steve Rogers, S.H.I.E.L.D wants to form Avengers even more. He didn't want to wait until Loki led Chitauri to attack Earth before the Avengers assembled. Didn't see now, because of their own reasons, these people in the first generation of Avengers did not just gather in the original movie, and did not trust each other so much. So Barton, as one of the first Avengers members, S.H.I.E.L.D naturally won't let him down. After the video call was connected, S.H.I.E.L.D was slightly taken aback. Who would have thought that Nick Fury is wearing a blindfold at the moment? You must know that Nick Fury never took off his blindfold easily in front of others. Even I have only seen it twice. In fact, Nick Fury's left eye was damaged, and Nick Fury replaced it with a bionic eye. On the one hand, during a mission a long time ago, more than 50% of his vision was lost due to an explosion. Later, he was caught by the little cat that devoured the primordial beast, and this, but Nick Fury never said the latter, only that his eyes were broken because he trusted someone he shouldn't. Maybe this is the so-called face. After putting on the blindfold, Nick Fury looked at S.H.I.E.L.D in the video and asked with a smile, It's not the first time I've seen it. What's wrong? Why did you suddenly remember to make a video for me? What happened to you, Lee Hao? Do you need my help? If you need it, just say it. Any resources, manpower can do it. 5. That's not true. You know my ability. The New York Aegis branch has been sorted out by me. It can be said that from top to bottom, they have become trustworthy people. Hearing Nick Fury's question, S.H.I.E.L.D replied directly, I would like to ask if I need help at headquarters. You're already old. You always need someone else to share it for you. Right, Nick? It's really not good. Leave the position of the S.H.I.E.L.D boss to me now, and you can also enjoy your retirement time. K off. You be *********D. Don't forget that no matter how strong your ability is, I brought it out. I'm not old enough to let you take over the position. 35 if you want to take my place. Wait a few years. You little b asterisk 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 d. Hearing Su-Che's words, Nick Fury laughed angrily and cursed. This stinky boy is getting smaller and smaller. Chapter 69. Listening to the conversation between the two, Hill, who was at the desk not far away, couldn't help but pouted. Guys, are you so blatant now? This is a set of intentions, not cheating at all, right? That seems to be the case. And Aegis from top to bottom seems to know that Nick Fury is going to hand over the identity of Aegis boss to Su-Che in the future. But even so, wouldn't that be a few years later? It's too early to say this now. Although it is a joke, it is better for others to know. After all, Aegis is not so stable now. Thinking of this, Hill glanced at the closed door of Nick Fury's office and nodded. As long as the door isn't open, then it's fine. Okay, you stinky brat. Don't tell me that it's useless. What's the matter with me this time? After pushing the drawer in, Nick Fury looked at Su-Che and asked. Nothing too big, Nick. You know my idea of a superhero team. Well, I know this and I support it very much. The name Avengers is all my name. That's it. Looking at Nick Fury in the video, Su-Che smiled and said, at present, I have tentatively appointed a few members, 530. 35, first of all, Steve Rogers. Since he's come back from the freeze, then this must be him. Agreed. What is his current situation? Hearing Su-Che mention Steve Rogers, Nick Fury nodded in agreement and asked, don't worry, although he is still unfamiliar with this world, it is not bad for now. Give him some time, and he should be able to adapt to this world. 35, since that's the case, I'm relieved. So what's next? Next up is Tony Stark and Dr. Banner. Looking at Nick in the video, Su-Che continued. It goes without saying that Dr. Banner was originally a professor and scientist with many degrees. In addition, after he transformed into Hulk, he has unparalleled strength. The only worry is that after transforming into Hulk, he will not recognize his 6 relatives. However, this has been resolved. In fact, the last time New York streets hated things, the reason why I brought Dr. Banner with me was for a test. The result is very good. At least Hulk is not very smart, and even his IQ is like an ignorant child, but he can distinguish between the enemy and us. That's enough. Hearing Su-Che's words, Nick Fury nodded in approval. Now that the only qualms about Dr. Banner's transformation into Hulk are gone, no problem. Next is Tony Stark, the son of Mr. Howard, albeit a once cynical, cocky and selfish B***************** D. But after this period of contact, and his time as a consultant to me at S.H.I.E.L.D, I realized he has the potential to be a superhero. Hearing Su-Che say this, Nick Fury thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. Although he didn't have much contact with Tony Stark, Nick Fury trusts Su-Che's judgment. Since Su-Che said that Tony Stark can, then Nick Fury believes that Tony Stark can. For now, it's Steve, Tony, and Dr. Banner. 35 definitely, there are too few of these 3. So I decided to put Natasha Romanoff and Barton on the team. 55 after all, the superhero team of Avengers needs 2 people from our Aegis. Hearing Su-Che mention Natasha Romanoff and Barton, Nick Fury nodded in agreement. That's right, the superhero team is not under the control of Aegis. But there must be 2 people from our Aegis. And Natasha Romanoff and Barton are undoubtedly the most suitable. Yes, that's the truth. Looking at Nick Fury, Su-Che spread his hands and said with a smile. So during this time, I have been letting them have too much contact, cultivating feelings and tacit understanding. In this way, when the time comes to really let the team strike, they can also be familiar with each other and cooperate with each other. That's the truth. The most important thing for a team is that the members are familiar with each other and can achieve tacit cooperation. You did a great job at this. Looking at Su-Che, Nick Fury praised with admiration. As expected of the person who brought it out with his own hands, all his thoughts coincide with his own. But now there's a problem, Nick. Leaning on the chair, watching Nick Fury who nodded in appreciation in the video, Su-Che spread his hands and smiled helplessly. The team is about to be formed, but you transferred Barton away. Isn't this dismantling my stage? Oh, so you are waiting for me here. Watching Su-Che go around a long way, the result is that he wants Barton to be transferred back. Nick Fury was suddenly speechless. When did this stinky boy learn to talk and go around in circles? You didn't give him these things yourself. Well, it must have been the time in New York that brought Tony Stark down. Now they have learned to be tricky and begging for people to themselves. Tony Stark, tilts his head in confusion. Meow meow? After a moment of silence, Nick Fury looked at Su-Che and suddenly asked, "Is the Aegis New York busy during this time? Or, do you have anything important to deal with?" "No, the New York Aegis branch has been cleaned up by me, and naturally there is nothing to keep me busy." Hearing Nick Fury suddenly asking himself, Su-Che shook his head and said he was not busy. "If that's the case, then take some time and go to the Western lands. Where are Barton and Phil Coulson? A few days ago, something fell from the sky. According to their message, it was a hammer that couldn't be lifted. This is very likely to be related to aliens. If you have nothing to do, take someone you see fit and go." Hearing Nick Fury's words, Su-Che's eyes lit up, then nodded. Understood. After hanging up the video, Natasha Romanoff then looked at Su-Che and asked curiously, "Super ability team? Avengers? What is that?" 39 At the same time, Trident Building headquarters. The Avengers that Sue wants to form, is there one person missing? Watching Nick Fury, Maria Hill asked, "Who is missing?" "It's definitely Sue-He himself." Listening to Nick Fury's rhetorical question, Hill said directly, "I know you want to hand over the future of Aegis to him, but I don't think it prevents him from becoming a member of the Avengers. You think, after we completely eradicate H.I.E.L.D, the strength of Aegis will inevitably be damaged, or even greatly reduced. I worry that at that time, the World Security Council will also take the opportunity to participate in the Aegis. In this way, the Aegis cannot remain intact. If at this time, Su-Che, the Aegis boss, is not only a member of the superhero team, but also has a great right to speak within the Avengers. Perhaps, this is only for Divine Shield. It will be more helpful." Looking at Nick Fury, Maria Hill said seriously. Chapter 70. A hammer fell from the sky? Why does it feel like the world is getting more and more fantastic now? With his hands behind his head and his legs on the coffee table, Natasha Romanoff looked at Su-Che lazily. "So who are you going to take to investigate this matter this time?" "I'd suggest taking Steve there. Firstly, I'll take this opportunity to let him relax, and secondly, he'll be safe by your side. Although it's very possible that Steve can't beat you, it's better than keeping him in the training room of the S.H.I.E.L.D. building and playing sandbags every day. It's better." Speaking of this, Sister Widow got up from the sofa, walked to Su-Che's side, and sat on Su-Che's lap without any consideration. "You know that sandbags also need money? I can't change several sandbags in one day. As for the Aegis building, I will help you look after it. Speaking of which, I haven't tried to take charge of one side's Aegis branch. I just want to take this opportunity to try. What does it feel like to be in charge of one side's Aegis branch?" With his arms around Su-Che's neck, Natasha Romanoff tilted his head and looked at Su-Che with a smile. "You can't trust me, my sister. How come?" Listening to Natasha Romanoff's ridicule, Su-Che smiled and said, "This time I personally went to the place where the hammer fell. I originally planned to let you help me watch the Aegis Tower during this time. After all, although Carl, Susan, and the others are very good, they can also take charge of a department by themselves. But if they want to take over a party quickly, their current ability is not enough. After all the calculations, nah, you can help me carry it for a while. What's more, I have already sorted out all the top and bottom branches of the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch, and there is no trouble. So I will give it to you, and I will feel relieved." Cut. Hearing Su-Che say this, Natasha Romanoff stretched out his hand and squeezed Su-Che's cheek gently. "Why isn't it as cute as it used to be? Old-fashioned. More and more like Nick." "Okay, New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch, before you come back, sister, I promise that nothing will go wrong. But you have to promise me one thing." "What's up?" Seeing Sister Widow's serious expression, Su-Che asked with a smile. "When I grow up, I have to find a girlfriend. I have met a girl named Catherine these days. She is very beautiful, and she is even similar to my sister. And she is still a student at a famous university. So wait until you come back this time, and go see this girl." With that said, Natasha Romanoff, as before, leaned her head on Su-Che's shoulder and whispered softly, "You know about my sister's past, so it is impossible to have a child of my own in this life. You and I have been partners for several years, and we have long been family members who can entrust each other with life and death. Sister, I hope now that you will get married soon and have a baby, so that my status as a godmother can be fulfilled." 35 Speaking of this, the widow sister felt helpless for a while. The little Natasha Romanoff from Barton's family has recently learned to speak, but she cried when she saw me. "You mean sister, do I look so scary?" Looking at the helpless and funny widow sister, Su-Che gently shook her head. How could it be? But after all, Barton's daughter is still young. so it's natural to be scared when she sees strangers. Wait until I grow up a bit. Hope so. With a long sigh, Sister Widow leaned on Su-Che's shoulder, squinted her eyes and said softly, "Last night, I dreamed of the damn Red House again. Everything that has been experienced in person, like a movie clip, reappears in my mind. Damn, I knew it wouldn't be so easy to blow up Dreykov back then. It was so cheap that he even let Dreykov's little daughter be buried there. This has also become the most innocent blood debt on my sister's shoulders." Listening to Natasha Romanoff's muttering, Su-Che patted Natasha Romanoff's back lightly, but didn't say much. "I heard about that incident, but I was still with Nick Fury at that time, and he was teaching himself, so I didn't get involved in it. So even if he knew, the boss of the Red House, Dreykov, did not die, and his daughter was also turned into a master imitator by him. But Su-Che has no way of saying it. After all, even if you know the result of something that you have not participated in, you can't say it clearly. Ask for flowers 0. Don't worry, nah, a lot of things will be resolved. When the time comes, I will personally help you to avenge this revenge." Hearing Su-Che's comfort, Natasha Romanoff suddenly laughed. Holding Su-Che's face in both hands, he constantly rubbed his face, and his long wine-red hair constantly swayed. "Sister, I have already avenged my revenge. Unless that fellow Dreykov can still be resurrected from the dead, don't worry, it's already fine. It's just a dream last night. It's not a big deal. Go and gather your members, here at Aegis Tower. My sister will help you watch." Gently rubbing Su-Che's handsome face, Natasha Romanoff said in a very gentle voice, "I also need to go." Point 0. Hearing Su-Che's words, Tony Stark said immediately, "I don't have anything to do anyway. Mark 20, JRVIS is helping me transform. Come on, man. It's not fair that you can't just take Steve there alone. And such a fantastic thing as a hammer fell from the sky. How could I be missing? So I don't care. I just have to go." Looking at Su-Che with arms crossed, "Tony Stark, looks like you don't promise me. I'll sneak past alone." Watching Tony start to be a rogue, the contact time has been longer, and he is more and more like Tony with Era's character. Su-Che shook his head helplessly. "What's the situation?" Turning his head to look at Dr. Banner, Su-Che pouted towards Tony and asked curiously, "What else could it be?" Tony's embarrassed now. Hearing Su-Che's question, Dr. Banner spread his hands and replied, "Yesterday, this guy confessed to Pabwa again, but the confession was all about giving flowers and gifts. Only this guy gave me a box of strawberries bought on the side of the road, and he said that eating more fruit is good for your health. 5 as a result. Peepo is the only one allergic to strawberries, so the result of this confession can be imagined." No, Tony, who feels a little socially dead, is now seriously embarrassed to a certain extent. "So I feel that I can't stay in New York anymore, and I want to go out and hide for a few days." Looking at Su-Che, Dr. Banner explained with a smile. 8. Chapter 71. How? Or nothing? Looking at Phil Coulson holding a testing instrument, Barton asked, "Nothing, there is no such thing on Earth. Even the material of the hammer can't be detected." Hearing Phil Coulson's words, Barton, carrying a bow and arrow, looked around at the people in the S.H.I.E.L.D. research team who were constantly busy. Then he looked at Phil Coulson and smiled. "You heard the order, Sue is coming." "I heard. It just happened that he came over to replace me." Having said this, Phil Coulson's eyes flashed with excitement. "You know what? Captain Steve Rogers will be here this time too. God, this news is so exciting." From the time Captain Rogers was discovered to the time he was resuscitated, I had been looking forward to seeing him, and even I applied to Mr. Nick more than once to protect Captain Rogers, 530s, from being resuscitated. Unfortunately, Nick refused my request and sent Captain Rogers to the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch. For this, I feel very sorry, and I don't know how long this mission will take, and I thought that the time to see Captain Rogers would be delayed. I didn't expect Sue to bring Captain Rogers this time. Thank God. Speaking of this, as if thinking of something, Phil Coulson looked at Barton with a regretful expression and said, "It's a pity. If you know that Captain Rogers will also come, then I'll be sure to bring those collector's edition Captain Rogers cards I've got so he can sign it for me." Watching the mention of Steve Rogers, Phil Coulson can't help himself at the moment. Barton smiled and patted his shoulder. As a colleague for so many years, Barton naturally knows that Steve Rogers is Phil Coulson's idol. Even Phil Coulson is a die-hard Steve Rogers fan. But seriously, to their generation, who didn't grow up listening to Captain Rogers stories? Who in childhood didn't dream of joining the Roaring Commando with a weapon, fighting alongside Captain Rogers, and defeating Hydra together? This time you'll get it. As for autographs and stuff, I think this time you're familiar with Captain Rogers. Then next time, he will not refuse your request. Definitely. Hearing Barton's words, Phil Coulson nodded with a serious expression. But is this okay? I mean, will it be a problem for Captain Rogers? You know, he's just been recovering for a while. I'm still relatively new to this world, and I'm afraid that when I take out those archived cards and express my admiration, it will evoke his memories of the past. I don't want to cause him even the slightest trouble because of these lost sense of proportions. Listen to Phil Coulson's words of anticipation and hesitation. Clint Barton was about to say something when he suddenly turned his head and looked at the sky not far away. They're coming. Hearing Barton's words, Phil Coulson's face was full of excitement. Looking forward to meeting Steve Rogers, Phil Coulson. A moment later, a Kuan-style fighter jet slowly descended from the sky to the ground. Obviously, with Mjolnir as the center point, a temporary camp has been surrounded by people from Aegis for a long time. Stepping down from the Kuan-style fighter and looking at the makeshift camps around, Su-Che nodded, but his eyes were not satisfied. While on the Quinjet, Su-Che discovered that this temporary camp had at least 4 loopholes. That is to say, if someone wants to attack this place, they can attack from at least 4 aspects. Although, Phil Coulson may think that no one would dare to attack the makeshift camp of Aegis. But, wait, something is wrong. Why was the first thought when he saw this temporary camp not to find out what was missing, but to think about how to launch an attack? It seems that I was greatly influenced by Nick Fury. You are welcome, sir. Look at Su-Che wearing a black trench coat and slowly walking down from the Kuan-style fighter. Phil Coulson smiled and stretched out his hand, with a refined smile on his face. Sir, the surrounding area has been occupied by our Aegis, and the surrounding civilians have all been evacuated. Looking at the smiling Phil Coulson, Su-Che was about to nod and say something. He heard Tony Stark, who had stepped down from the quintessential fighter behind him, muttered, "Why is my position as a pilot on this journey? God, am I the dignified Tony Stark?" Even the S.H.I.E.L.D. researchers couldn't detect the material and useful information of the hammer that fell from the sky. Can I detect it? Just kidding. I'm just positioning me as a driver. I express a serious protest. At least show me the hammer that fell from the sky. Maybe I'll find something new. Listening to Tony Stark's muttering, Su-Che ignored it. In fact, this guy was already muttering all the way when he arrived in a Quinjet. Tony, even if you were the same genius as Howard back then, but in fact, since there is no such thing from aliens on Earth, even if you are a genius, there is no way to fully understand it. Steve, who stepped down from the Quinjet, heard Tony still muttering, dissatisfied. Steve Rogers said with a smile, and, to be honest, although the contact time is not long, I think Howard is smarter. According to Sue's words, Howard is only limited by his era. By the way, did you talk to my father like this back then? I always feel that you are borrowing my father to despise me. 0.8 Listening to Captain America's words, Tony Stark said speechlessly. What do you mean I'm not as good as my dad? Obviously I'm smarter than my dad, more full of wisdom. It must be during this time that Steve and Su-Che broke down. It must be so. I really miss that Steve who couldn't speak in a deep sleep. Well, just thinking about that key to the future that made itself a new element. Tony Stark smacked his lips. Forget it. If you can't compare to my dad, you can't compare to my dad. Watching Captain America Steve Rogers step down from the Quinjet, he looked around curiously. Phil Coulson, who originally had a refined and easygoing smile, suddenly widened his eyes. The excitement of the fans seeing their idols can hardly be concealed. Chapter 72. Look at the excited Phil Coulson at the moment. Su-Che suddenly laughed. Along the way, I felt that I had forgotten something, and I thought it was something that I forgot to instruct the New York Aegis branch before I left. Co-authoring is because I forgot. The biggest fan of Captain America and Aegis. Thinking of this, Su-Che laughed and joked. Why, everyone brought it to you. Why don't you go up and make a move roar? I remember you also showed me the Captain America card collector's edition that you treasured. Now it's time to get an autograph. That's right. 35 Hearing Su-Che's words, Phil Coulson didn't even hear Su-Che's ridicule, but blinked his eyes, wondering if it would be inappropriate to do so. Looking at the little Iron fan who was a little confused because he saw Captain America himself for the first time. Su-Che reached out and patted Phil Coulson on the shoulder, then turned his head and smiled at Steve who was talking to Tony. Steve, let me introduce you to someone. Phil Coulson. There are only 2 guys in Aegis that are called good guys, and he's one of them. Oh yes, he's still your fan. 35 exactly. Steve, let him take you around this temporary camp. 28. After all, you have experience in this area too. Look at what they have laid out. There are some deficiencies or defects. 39. Hearing Su-Che's words, Phil Coulson's eyes suddenly lit up, and then he gave Su-Che a very grateful look. Being able to take a walk with your idol in this place that you set up, oh my god, what could be better than this? Tony, let's go. Don't you want to see that hammer falling from the sky? What are you waiting for? After making a call to Tony Roar, Su-Che took Barton and walked in the direction of Mjolnir. Huh, can I really watch it? Great, I thought I was really just a driver this time around. Man, I knew you couldn't be so ruthless. By the way, let me test it. I think everything can be measured using science. Listening to go farther and farther. Only a few people who keep talking about Tony Stark. Phil Coulson took a deep breath, then suppressed his excitement, stretched out his hand and smiled at Steve Rogers. Welcome here, Captain Rogers. Thanks. Shaking hands with Phil Coulson, Steve smiled and said thank you. Then, let's check if there are any loopholes in the surrounding layout. After all, I think in this regard, Roger is the captain and you are the professional. Looking at his idol from childhood until now, Phil Coulson invited with a smile. Okay, just in time to go around. Since I recovered from the ice, this is the first time I have come this far. With that said, Steve and Phil Coulson walked around. As he walked, Steve looked around, constantly observing the guard's branch, and asked Phil Coulson with a smile. I just heard Sue said that there are 2 good people in the Aegis. One is you. Who is the other? Can you tell me? Hearing the idol's question, Phil Coulson answered naturally and truthfully. Definitely, Captain Rogers. The other one who is recognized by everyone is the Sioux. From the time he was in the Eagle's Nest to the moment he was in charge of the party, for a full 12 years, everyone's evaluation of him was that he had a gentle personality and a perfect character. He was also very humble in life. 99. The most important thing is that, whether it is the 7th level agent in the Aegis or the passerby level agent, he can get his respect and help. At the same time, he is very respected. It can be said that he is the person with the best character since the establishment of Aegis. Hearing Phil Coulson's words, think back to the time I spent with Su-Che during this time. Steve Rogers nodded in agreement. Sue is indeed very gentle and willing to think about others. Even if he often jokes with Tony, it's because he and Tony are friends. As for the rest of the New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch, whether it's Carl or Susan, or any other young man, he can love them like a big brother. This is not easy. After all, although I don't know much about Aegis, I spent a long time on the front line 70 years ago. Naturally know what kind of attitude the superior has towards his subordinates. 39. I'm afraid this is also the reason why Susan and Carl have strong ability, but they are obedient to Sue. 35. Hearing the idol's praise for Su-Che, inexplicably, Phil Coulson felt a little jealous. Jealous. But after thinking about it, this trace of jealousy disappeared in an instant. I have known Sue for 12 years. This is a person who can't make anyone have any bad evaluation or envy. Even if it was just because of the affirmation and praise of his idol from childhood to adulthood, he felt a little jealous. But it disappeared in no time. Sue deserves such a compliment from Captain Rogers, at least Phil Coulson thinks so. Actually, being able to join someone like Sue and become 2 good people in Aegis, I think your character must be very worthy of respect. 35. After all, I just saw that Sue spoke highly of you. Hearing the idol's affirmation of himself, Phil Coulson subconsciously wanted to clench his fist and wave it hard. Fortunately, the professionalism over the years made him just smile politely and mildly, and then 530 was humble. If at this moment Steve Rogers could read minds, or see through what a person really thinks, then you will definitely see in Phil Coulson's heart. At this moment a mini Phil Coulson is constantly jumping on the spot, and waving small fists and constantly excited high roar. Mom, you see, I was praised by idols. The feeling is simply awesome. Captain Rogers, forever. At the same time, not far from where Mjolnir fell. These things are useless at all. Looking at the special material plastic that is similar to shielding signals, it can also block sunlight and rain. Tony Stark said to Su-Che. Although these things are particularly effective, they also interfere with the detection of the instrument. The more precise the instrument, the more afraid of being disturbed. Even the slightest disturbance will make a huge change in many values. This is the inspector sent from the Trident building headquarters? Why are the methods so rough? It seems that after I go back this time, It is necessary that I have to teach the monitoring team of our New York S.H.I.E.L.D. branch a good lesson. Looking at the members of the team wearing protective clothing and holding various instruments to continuously test Mjolnir, Tony Stark ranted at Suche. Chapter 73. Asgard. Looking at Odin lying inside the golden defensive barrier, Loki is at a loss at this moment. All along, Odin in his heart was so powerful that it is unmatched, so powerful that as long as he is there, then Asgard is the only god realm in the 9 realms. Maybe even time has no way to beat him. But now, the God King who was unmatched in Loki's heart was weak and fell into a deep sleep. It seems that it is possible to enter eternal sleep at any time. This is somewhat unacceptable to Loki. However, looking at the unacceptable colleague of the God King who was in absolute weakness and sleeping, he gave birth to extremely complicated emotions, especially looking at the cheeks that are already full of wrinkles and look old at the moment. Loki sighed subconsciously. Perhaps, since he and his brother, the reckless idiot Thor, grew up, my father began to age. He walked forward slowly and gently held Odin's old hand. Even if he just knew the truth of the matter, even if he was not the Prince of Asgard, but the son of the monster he had called him from childhood to adulthood, I really feel like I want to get his love. I really wanted to tell him that, like Thor, I could give my life for Asgard. You can also put your trust in me, Loki. But looking at the father in 533's coma, Loki couldn't open his mouth. He could only sigh sadly. It's okay. He needs to rest. Looking at Loki's eyes flashed a trace of pain, sadness, but some strange emotions at this moment. Queen Frigga didn't think much, just sat on the other side and held Odin's hand lightly. Looking at Loki with kindness and love in his eyes. My child, your father just needs to rest. He has not rested for thousands of years. Your brother Thor was banished to Earth by your father. So now, Loki, you will take on your responsibilities as the second prince of Asgard. Hearing his mother's words, Loki raised his head slightly and looked at the mother whose expression was full of kindness. Loki, who was originally full of words to talk about, was almost spoiled when he met his mother. In the end, he didn't say anything, just nodded slightly. Mother, I know. It's just, is the father still awake? Loki didn't care about his mother's slip of the tongue. Perhaps the mother at this moment was also extremely saddened that she misrepresented herself as the 3rd prince of Asgard. Yes, my dearest son, your father just needs, to rest and he will wake up. So you don't have to worry. His face gently brushed Odin's old cheek, and then Queen Frigga gently waved. The next moment, the 2 rows of golden gates slowly opened, and the next 2 Asgard warriors came to Loki with the Spear of Eternity belonging to Odin in both hands. Watching the 2 Asgard warriors place the Spear of Eternity in front of him, Loki subconsciously looked at his mother. Take it, my dearest son. Looking at Loki a little surprised and a little longing, Frigg said in a gentle voice, take your father's scepter and prove like the people of Asgard that you, Loki, the Prince of Asgard, will never be ashamed of Asgard. Hearing his mother's gentle voice, Loki stood up slowly, taking the Spear of Eternity from the Asgard warrior with both hands. Holding the Spear of Eternity, his eyes are constantly changing at this moment, and he doesn't know what he is thinking about. After a while, the originally complicated eyes turned into a firmness. Don't worry, mother. I know what to do. I won't let you down, the people of Asgard. Saying this, Loki finally fixed his eyes on the sleeping Odin. Looking at Odin with a very complicated look, Loki didn't even realize how firm he was in what he said next. I will protect Asgard at the cost of my life, and I will prove to my father that I, Loki, are no less than my brother Thor. After finishing speaking, Loki gave his mother a slight salute, and then he took big strides and walked towards the outside with firm footsteps. 2 Asgard warriors followed behind Loki, and after they went out, they slowly closed the golden gate again. After the 2 rows of golden doors slowly closed, the original face was full of kind and gentle Frigga. The next moment, he suddenly raised his hand and slapped Odin's face in a deep sleep. But when the palm was about to touch Odin's cheek, it stopped moving. In the end, it turned into a gentle stroke on Odin's face. How can you do this? He is also our son. Looking at Odin, there was a trace of dissatisfaction and a trace of complaining in Frigg's voice. Wow, very strange substance. Hold the detector and look at the values coming from the detector. Tony Stark turned his head to look at Suche and said seriously, dude, You know that I have been studying the elements of vibranium all this time. 35, aren't you confessing to Pebble and getting rejected? Hearing Tony's words, Su-Che answered while playing with his phone. Su-Che looked up after he didn't hear Tony go on. Okay, that's right. You're working on vibranium, and you haven't been rejected by Pepe, you just haven't been together for a while. So what's next? 35 looking at Tony, who was looking at him with a resentful look on his face because of his own words. Su-Che can only put down the phone and continue to ask as Tony said, Humph. Sundaras gave Su-Che a look of acquaintance. Tony Stark then continued. The next step is definitely to continue with Pebble Watch. Damn B asterisk 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 D. Let you give it to me, the train of thought is disrupted. Looking at Su-Che, who was smiling brightly because of his own words. Tony put a middle finger at Su-Che angrily and then continued. From the numerical value and careful inspection, this kind of thing is indeed a metal that has never appeared on Earth. I've been studying vibranium recently, but from this set of data, the material that makes this hammer should be about the same strength as vibranium, or even stronger than vibranium. Definitely, this is just my guess. After all, I have studied vibranium, but I haven't studied the material of this hammer, so I can't believe it. Unless it is the source material that can make this hammer, or find a way to dissolve this hammer. But it seems that the latter is more difficult. Definitely I will find a way. I don't believe I can't melt a hammer. Speaking of which, Tony Stark put down the detector in his hand, looked at Su-Che and said seriously, Look, I'll say that the Aegis inspectors are not good. After I go back this time, I don't care about the Trident building headquarters, but the testing personnel and scientific researchers of the S.H.I.E.L.D. branch in New York, I have to retest or train. Seeing Tony's smug expression, Su-Che thought for a while, then nodded and said, This is no problem. However, let's let this hammer go. Don't melt it for now. My grandfather passed away, and I didn't sleep for 2 days and 2 nights during the wake-up call. I only ate 1 meal in the 2 days. I just came back, and I was interrupted for 2 days. I'm sorry. Chapter 74. Mjolnir melted is impossible to melt. Not to mention whether Mjolnir can be melted according to the existing technology of the Earth. Even if Mjolnir can be melted, I'm afraid I haven't waited for Tony and myself to act, then Odin will play a magic weapon in the next moment. Although, with the Ancient One magician around, it doesn't matter if the God King Odin comes to Earth. After all, when Odin sealed his brother Kull on the Earth, he still owed Sorcerer Supreme a big favor. And if it wasn't for the permission of the Sorcerer Supreme, even if Odin wanted to seal Kull, it would be impossible. Well, Kull is Odin's older brother, and Bor is Odin's dad. So even if he is not afraid of Odin, in case Thor regains his powers, he reaches out and wants to summon Mjolnir back. As a result, I reached out for a long time and found that, Thor's hammer is gone? Gee, embarrassing? Well, so for Thor not to be so embarrassed, Su-Che still decided to not melt Thor's hammer for the time being. After all, it is still the same time in the future, and it is still the veteran of the first generation of Avengers, so let's save some face for him. Well, it's definitely not that Earth technology is not good. Absolutely not. Whispering. 2 days later, in a small town. Why did you take him away? Did he break the law here? Looking at the 2 men in black suits, he opened his mouth to take Thor away. Jane Foster directly protected Thor behind her, with an expression that no one could move Thor. Looking at Jane Foster's actions, the 2 action groups looked at each other, and then said comfortably, Ms. Jane Foster, please rest assured that we have no malice towards Mr. Thor. Just wanted to take it back and learn something. 5. Since there is no malicious intent, why do you have to take it away? Can't we talk here? In the face of the members of the action team, Jane Foster did not give in at all, but instead looked at the 2 with vigilance. In her heart, although Thor had just met him not long ago, and even hit him once with his car, he is definitely a good person. I'm afraid that I like to drop the cup when I drink, and I don't know how to treat anything. But the family is handsome. No, a him. That's because he's not familiar with it yet. So in the face of such a weak person who has no life experience, how can he trust Thor to these 2 unidentified guys? Hey, are you 2 trying to take me away? Looking at Jane Foster with a nervous expression in front of him, Thor grinned and smiled, not to mention, it feels good to be protected by a girl. But he is the dignified Asgard Thor, the son of the father of God Odin, Thor Odinson. How can a girl who is unarmed and without any strength protect herself? Although I used to dream of being a Valkyrie when I was young, but when I grew up, I realized that Valkyrie is called Valkyrie. The reason is because they are women. Thinking of this, Thor stretched out his hand to protect Jane Foster behind him, and then looked at the two people in front of him with some pride. If you want to do something, then come here. Thor will not be afraid of any enemy. First, we are two, not one. Second, Mr. Thor, we are not enemies. After correcting Thor's words, one of the action team looked at Thor and said seriously, Mr. Thor, on the order of our commander, I want to invite you to a place. And the boss also specially instructed that we can't do anything to you. So please understand, this is why we will persuade you with good words. If we want to congratulate you, even this Lady Jane Foster's protection in front of you is of no use. S.H.I.E.L.D never needs any reason to take action, and I hope you can cooperate with us, don't make us embarrassed. Having said that, the man in the black-clothed action group took a step forward, and then looked at Thor, who was vigilant and clenched his fists as if ready to attack at any time. Then he said seriously, by the way, our boss also said, Thor Odinson, if you want to restore the previous ability, then please cooperate with us and leave with us. 5. Hearing the last sentence, Thor, who was wary and seemed ready to fight at any time, suddenly widened his eyes, looking at the man in black in front of him with a face of surprise. You mean, the officer you mentioned can restore my divine power? I don't know what divine power you were talking about, but our boss really said so. Haha. Hearing the words of the members of the action team, Thor immediately laughed proudly. I knew it. I knew how there could be someone who doesn't know who I am. Haha, great. Finally someone knows who I am, Thor. Having said that, Thor proudly stretched out his hand and patted his shoulder in the disgusting gaze of the action team member. Man, although you don't have much vision, your boss's vision is still good. At least he can know who I am. 95. It's just that since I know my identity, I don't want to take the initiative to come to see me, but forget it, it's the same for me to see him anyway, but unfortunately I can't summon my hammer now. Otherwise I'll just fly over there. Definitely, I mean, your Earth's cars aren't bad either, but they're a little troublesome. Listening to Thor's words, the members of the action team remained calm, but the disgust in their eyes became heavier and heavier. I don't know what the boss is thinking, but he wants to see such a guy who suffers from delusional disorder. Can you fly with a hammer? Why don't you say you can fly with an axe? Don't worry, Jane. Since they know who I am, they won't do anything to me. I'll come back to you after I've gone to restore my divine power. Haha. Having said that, Thor nodded to Jane Foster, and then he couldn't wait to get into the car of the two members of the Black Action Team. Come here. Start this thing called a car. I can't wait. Seeing Thor as cheerful as Era at the moment, the two members of the black-clothed action team looked at each other. Then he nodded to Jane Foster, Daisy behind her, and the doctor, then turned and drove away. Seeing these two guys take Thor away, Jane Foster immediately turned her head and said anxiously, they just took Thor away? What if they are bad people? Probably not. They claim to be people of Aegis. Dr. Eric Shawig thought for a while, then picked up the phone and said, I know one of the people in Aegis. Let me call and ask. Thank you, brothers, for your concern. It's okay. Take a rest in the evening, break for 2 days. I owe a bit more. I won't rest during the day. Write more to make up for it. 8. Chapter 75. Dr. Banner called me. Looking at Suche, Tony Stark shrugged his shoulders and said, Dr. Banner called me just now and said that a doctor named Eric called S.H.I.E.L.D, and then called him again. The reason is that we sent people to take the guy named Thor. Hope we don't do anything to him, and then say a lot of things. 35. After speaking, Tony looked at Suche and asked, how did that doctor named Eric know Banner? I don't know either, but Dr. Banner used to be a professor, and that Dr. Eric was also a professor. While playing the game, while pushing Eric Shavig's information to Tony, Suche didn't even look up. Maybe it's because they worked together, or they met more than once. Just like you, haven't you seen a lot of people over the years? Definitely, you are different from Dr. Banner. After all, Dr. Banner has always left a very good impression on 533, and you? I find that you feel a little uncomfortable if you don't tease me for a day. Isn't it because the commander lost? Believe it or not, I will buy that game company back immediately, and then upgrade the equipment to the top level? Silently raised a middle finger at Suche, Tony Stark said, oh, money can't buy game-specific technology. Hearing Tony say this, Suche finally raised his head from the phone screen. As far as your game level is concerned, it is estimated to be comparable to that of a 7-year-old child. 35. You're too embarrassed to talk about me? Look at your record. Even fighting a monster whose level is not as good as yours requires the support of a red blood bottle. And I didn't play games before. Who am I? I'm Tony Stark. How can I play games? And even if I play games, I have JRVIS support. 99. It's not like you, the person in charge of the dignified New York Aegis branch, a successor to the next boss of Aegis. As a result, I am now playing games here every day. He curled his lips in disdain, and then looked at S.H.I.E.L.D's phone. Hey, by the way, have you killed that monster called S.H.I.E.L.D? No, the blood volume is several layers thicker than mine. Then if you upgrade your weapon, I think after the upgrade, you can beat it. Come on, I listened to you just now, but the weapon shattered when it was upgraded. Trust me once, try again. You have to believe me. Do not believe. Listening to the lack of nourishment between the two people around him, Steve Rogers, who kept his head down, finally raised his head. Upgrade weapons? Upgrade what weapons? And why do weapons break? Also, why didn't I know there was a monster called S.H.I.E.L.D? Hearing Steve Rogers' question, both S.H.I.E.L.D and Tony raised their heads at the same time. Steve, we're not talking about the same thing. Your snake has no boss and can't upgrade weapons. Glancing at Steve Rogers' phone screen, Tony Stark spit it out. Why? Facing Tony's complaints, Steve Rogers looked at S.H.I.E.L.D curiously. Isn't this a game? Just when S.H.I.E.L.D was thinking about how to teach Steve what is a standalone game and what is an action online game, suddenly there was a knock on the door of the office. After receiving the order that S.H.I.E.L.D agreed to come in, a member of the intelligence team walked in. Sir, Scott of the operation team has brought people back, and now they are locked in the surveillance room of the temporary camp. Hearing the reply from the intelligence team, S.H.I.E.L.D immediately turned off the phone, turned his head to look at Steve Rogers, and smiled. It seems that our alien guests are here, so now is not the time to play with the phone. Let's go and entertain this alien guest. I feel a sense of relief inexplicably. What's the matter with the swelling? Definitely not the trouble of giving Steve popular science stuff. Absolutely not. Hearing S.H.I.E.L.D say this, Steve lowered his head and looked at the greedy snake that was under his control and was constantly eating fruit. After hesitation for 0.25 seconds, he closed the game very neatly. Exactly, after recovering from the ice, I haven't seen an alien yet. I do not have either. Seeing that with great perseverance, Shang closed the game. Tony Stark gave Steve a thumbs up in appreciation, then got up and laughed as well. Well, I definitely don't dislike that Steve only plays with snakes. Absolutely not. Monitor the room. Pushing open the door and entering the monitoring room, S.H.I.E.L.D gestured to the members of the two action teams with his eyes. Seeing that the members of the action team turned and left immediately with relief, S.H.I.E.L.D looked at Thor with a smile on his face. Tisk, just leave? Haven't had a good time yet? I still have a lot of questions to ask them. They're pretty good people. Watching the two members of the action team turn and leave, Thor smacked his lips with regret. And the two members of the action team who were almost walking to the door, after hearing Thor's words behind them, their footsteps became even faster. Nima, who wants to continue chatting with you? As for those idiots' questions, if it weren't for the face of Aegis and the ignorant but confident eyes of your era, I don't want to waste so much time and saliva. We haven't talked enough yet? Or are we good people? I actually sent a good card to Lousy. Pooh. Go to Lili for a claw. Watching the members of the action team leave quickly, Tony Stark, who was beside him, looked at S.H.I.E.L.D and smiled and said, "It seems that in the future, it is more reliable to ask people to be handed over to the intelligence team. The guys in the action team are too impatient. The brothers in the action team are only in charge of fighting, and it is normal to have no patience to answer these simple questions. After all, let them be like this. They would rather choose to take up arms and fight the enemy." With that said, S.H.I.E.L.D took a step forward and smiled at Thor, who looked around curiously. "Welcome to Earth, Thor Odinson." "Haha, you are the officer they said? Not bad, you actually know me. But you just talked about fighting or something. I'm absolutely the clearest of that. 35, the two guys just now are your S.H.I.E.L.D fighters. They are very good people, although they are much weaker than Asgard's fighters. Although I don't think Asgard's fighters are that strong. But since you know me, you should know that as long as I lead them with Mjolnir, they will be invincible." 99 Speaking of the battle, Thor excitedly waved his arm, and then felt a little helpless. "But unfortunately, my Mjolnir doesn't know where it fell. Can you help me find my hammer? If you can, then I owe you a favor, man, and in the name of Thor, I will announce that I will help you." 95 As long as I am willing to help you, any enemy of yours will be plunged into endless fear. Looking at S.H.I.E.L.D, Thor has a confident look on his face at the moment. Hearing Thor's swear words, Tony Stark tilted his head and looked at Steve, who was holding his arms, and said, This guy is crazy. Are guys from Aliens so arrogant? I don't know. It's the first time I've seen aliens. It's not what I thought. At least there are no tentacles on the head. Facing Tony's question, Steve Rogers replied softly with his arms crossed. Sorry for the late update since I slept at noon until now. The wake-up call has not slept. So tired. G.
Thanks for watching. You can find the next videos in the playlist linked in the info card, directly on my channel, or right here on the screen. And as always, if you have any feedback, feel free to share it in the comments too.